This is Audible.
Harlequin Audio is proud to bring you Revelation, a De La Vega Cats novel by Dane. Performed by Tanya Eby. Chapter 1. Kendra sat up in her bed on a strangled gasp, her hand outflung to ward off the danger she'd dreamed of. Before she could shake off sleep enough to call Renee to check on her sister, her phone rang. She scrambled to grab it as the dream wore off and set her free. Yes? What's happening?
Kendra, can you come over, please?
Kendra shoved her hair from her eyes, getting out of bed and yanking pants on. Jack? She asked, recognizing her brother-in-law's voice. What's going on?
Renee's had a dream. She's upset and she won't talk about it without you.
Give me a few minutes. I'm on my way.
Max is on his way to your apartment right now. I'd send one of my men, but he's closer and obviously capable of protecting you. Don't leave until you know it's him.
I don't need an escort, she managed to say as she pulled on her bra and then a shirt. Max. A delicious warmth pushed away some of her panic. Still, it wasn't time for adolescent mooning over a boy she could never have. I'll be there in 5 minutes.
Kendra, your sister will kill me if something happens to you because you were attacked.
Jack's voice lost some of its bite.
She's safe now. I know you're worried. Just sit tight, please.
She smiled, knowing he couldn't see her and also that he loved her sister with a ferocity she'd only ever seen in a shifter. For such an alpha male to break down and plead only made her more worried about her sister, even as it pleased her that he clearly adored Renee. She sighed. Fine. Just keep her awake and don't let anyone inside until I arrive. If he's not here in 5 minutes, I'm going without him. His sigh was way less tired and more agitated. What? Come on, Jack. I'm worried about her and she's there and I'm here. I can't wait all night. I'm worried. All right?
All right. And Kendra?
Yeah?
Thank you.
I love my sister. It's not a thing. She hung up and put on shoes while she brushed her teeth quickly. Max de la Vega was one of the hottest men she'd ever laid eyes on. The least she could do was not look like a hag when he arrived. They'd exchanged some looks, mild flirting. Renee had told her he was dating a woman, another Jaguar shifter, but had broken things off a few months back. Renee seemed to think it was about Kendra. She'd love to believe that, but he was not her normal fare. Like a 5-star restaurant with all the dollar signs, and she was that little fuzz shop down the hill that everyone loved because it was good and fit a budget. That didn't necessarily sound right. But whatever, it was an argument she was having in her head. Who would judge? She heard the purr of an engine and looked out to the street where Max had just pulled up. Not bad. 4 of the 5 minutes she'd given Jack. He probably drove like a crazy person, which, given the situation, she appreciated, as she jogged down the inner stairs and outside to meet him. He, good sweet heavens, looked so good standing there on her stoop, she nearly forgot her sister was in trouble.
Did you look through the peephole before you came barreling out here?
He asked her in that voice. The voice she'd been thinking about since she'd first heard it nearly 4 months before. A rumble, a growl, and sometimes, if she was very lucky, nearly a purr. Still, hello, she wasn't a 5-year-old. Nope, I rushed out here with dollar bills pinned to my shirt. He snorted, a smile hinting at the corners of his mouth.
Come on, then. Car's right there.
If by car, one meant a sleek black Jaguar. Which, okay, she laughed, and he looked at her sideways.
What?
He hustled her inside the still-running car, and he lectured her about opening her door? You're a black Jaguar. Am I not supposed to notice your car is too? Without asking, he reached over and belted her in before squealing away.
Watch the upholstery. You're going to rip it to shreds.
If you didn't drive like a maniac, I wouldn't have to hold on so tight. Also, you left your car running. You lectured me on opening my door, which, yes, I did look out first, I'm not a moron. And your car was unlocked and running on a city street in Boston at 3 a.m.
Who's going to steal from me, Kendra?
He had a point, she supposed. It's not like a thief is going to know you're some super-duper alpha jaguar shifter. He laughed then.
Oh, little witch. You're so smart and powerful and yet naive sometimes. Predators always know other predators, or they become prey.
Oh. I'm nearly 5'9". I'm not little.
You are compared to me.
If he wasn't 11 feet tall, that wouldn't be true. Then again, if he wasn't 6.5 feet tall of delicious chocolate skin, he wouldn't be as ridiculously sexy as he was. Which would be a shame because he was the fodder for many of her best masturbatory fantasies. Why are you on guard duty anyway? She pretended to ignore the way he drove, all while fervently thanking the universe for airbags.
Galen asked. It was you. I came.
It was her? Really? What did he mean? That she was Renee's sister and so his relation? Or her specifically because he had fantasy wankfests about her? Gah, okay. She didn't need to go down that road just then. They turned onto Renee's street and she tensed, holding her bag ready.
Hold on, babe. No need to hurt yourself jumping from a moving car, he said, screeching to a stop.
Babe?
I could call you sexy if you'd prefer.
She huffed an annoyed breath, swinging her door open and jumping out. I'm not that girl, Max de la Vega.
Dream on, Kendra. You are and more,
he murmured as he got out on his side, making her all flustered. Several times over the last few weeks, he'd turned her into goo with silly things, the way he looked at her, or some tossed-out comment. At first he'd sort of been wary, but friendly. Slowly, though, it had felt as if he'd begun to focus on her in an altogether new and non-related sort of way. His attention wasn't so much off-putting, but intense. He had a way of looking at her, intimate, as if he brushed her skin with his lips as he stared. They were all that way, the shifter males, no matter the rank. They were intense beings. They paid attention on a level she hadn't thought existed. This one in particular also had a way of moving like there wasn't a damned thing in the universe capable of scaring him. He owned every single step he took, simply expected everyone to pay attention and be there when he needed it. Like the way he handed his keys off to Gibson, Max and Galen's brother, and the bringer of the jamboree, who tossed them to another guy who drove off without a word. Cripes, there were at least 6 shifters out in front of the house, all on guard. Their magic filled the area with loam and fur. Her magic always rose in the presence of wares. It flowed around her like a warm breeze. Gibson cleared people from the base of the steps and nodded at Kendra.
They're inside, waiting.
Gibson rarely said much, but damn, he was pretty to look at. 2 extra-large males flanked them, leading them into the house. She really had no idea how Renee could take all this coddling and manhandling. It drove her nuts.
Come on up. Renee is waiting for you.
Galen motioned to her, and she pushed past the guards to jog up the stairs to her sister.
She's in the bedroom.
Jack stood at the door, directing her inside. Renee was there, sitting in the bed, her eyes wide and glossy from unshed tears. Kendra went to her, hugging her tight. Their connection snapped into place, filling Kendra with the warmth of their like magic. Shh, I'm here. You're here. Kendra pushed the hair from Renee's face. No one else is. She knew her sister would always carry the fear that something or someone had gotten inside her. Who wouldn't after her experiences in the last several months? You sure? She nodded. Would you like me to scan you again? In the room, too? She could simply barge in and see herself, but Kendra believed very strongly that it was a violation of her gifts to not seek permission to use her magic on another person in anything other than self-defense. You can do that. We have something called other sight. Some of us have more than others. It's like you with healing, right? Each of us has a unique set of gifts. We talked about this before, and I think you're coming along so well I can teach you. Then yes, please. She stood and went to where Jack guarded the open door. The place had filled up with so much alpha shifter. It stirred her blood and messed with her concentration. I need to close the door. There's a lot of energy out there. It's like white noise. You can stay in here or just on the other side. All right? He nodded once, his gaze returning to Renee, who smiled at him, relaxing the rigidity of his spine a bit.
Whatever you need.
She closed the door after squeezing his hand. Okay then. Kendra reached inside herself, unlocking the door to the well of her magic, letting it flow outward to fill the room. Through the eyes of her magic, she saw nothing but Renee's energy, green and vibrant, connected in 1,000 ways with Galen and Jack. Their bond was written all over her, all over the space. That protected her. There was nothing else inside her sister but her sister. Though she could see the marks made by Renee's past, and whoever had manipulated her memories. It had scarred her, but Renee would heal. She opened her eyes, letting the energy swirl back to where it belonged. It's just you inside. There's something outside, a shadow of something. I can't tell yet if it's old or new, but what's in here? It's not dark like before. The wards will hold. A shadow was a whisper beyond the wards, and Kendra had a feeling that's what had awoken her from a dead sleep just a few minutes before. Thank goodness. I dreamed she knew. Not dreamed. Kendra, Susan, had something to do with Mom's murder. She knew, and they did something to me. They put something in me to make me forget. Kendra's breath gusted from her lips. Your memory came back? Not all, but parts. I was on the swing set in the backyard and they were talking about Mom being dead, talking about what to do with me. He knew. He was in on it. Our father had something to do with her murder. Renee's gaze had been on the past, but it sharpened, focusing on Kendra's face. You knew it. Not for certain, no. But it felt logical that the way he'd acted pointed to his guilt on some level. She had mentioned it because her sister hadn't been ready to hear it. But the man had abandoned an infant and then had disowned another for daring to ask questions about her own past. That had guilt stamped all over it, as far as Kendra was concerned. We need to call the police. Renee sat up, stronger now that she'd been given the all-clear. The police can't help us and you know it. You need to drink that tea and go back to sleep. We don't know where he is yet. Rosemary and Mary have been working on finding accurate locator spells. We've tried a few, but they haven't worked so far. There's nothing we can do right now, but be patient. Jack tapped on the door, poking his head in.
Is she all right?
Some of our aunt's spell is working. Her memories are unknotting, rising to the surface. This happens while we sleep a lot because our consciousness is at rest. She's all right. The house is clear. The wards are holding.
What can we do?
Galen came in, pressing a mug into Kendra's hands before moving to Renee and giving another to her.
Drink it.
He was part of her murder, Renee said softly. Kendra didn't have to ask who he was. Renee had just told her their father had a part in their mother's murder, a fact Kendra had long suspected. Kendra settled in and tried to stay patient. The memory. I was on the swings in the backyard. She came out, Susan, and they talked about Mom, how she was dead. They started talking about me. She said Mom had written spells into my skin, into muscle and bone, and they couldn't kill me. He said she should put a pillow over my face. Renee's voice broke, and Kendra wanted to hurt their father very much. He'll get what's due him, I promise you that. Kendra meant every word. What had happened to their mother needed to be avenged. What they'd done to Renee and to Kendra. They needed to pay, and they would. Susan told him they could drain me for years. They broke my memories. And Susan had been drawing from her since. A chill passed through Kendra at that. It's what kept you alive, that and the wards Mom made for you. It also means we know for sure Susan is a mage. She's stealing magic.
We have laws for dealing with thieves and murderers.
Jack took a deep breath as he drew his fingertips along Renee's temple.
And anyone who dares to hurt those weaker, like women and children, has a special place in hell. I'm going to kill them both to underline that point.
Kendra patted his arm. We have to find them first. I'm working on it with Mary, my teacher. It's a matter of finding the right, She paused, searching for the right word. Frequency. That's not it exactly, but it's close enough. Her head began to hurt, and she remembered she had to be up in a few hours to get ready for her third day of work. She had been building a normal life, and it wouldn't do to be late to this great new job. I'm going to go back home. She's shaken up, but aside from that, she's fine. Kendra leaned down to hug her sister. I'll be here after work for our lessons. There's no reason to be any more vigilant than you were yesterday, but still reason to be on your guard. You're safe here and safe at work. Don't let him win. I'm sorry for dragging you out here when you have to be at work so early. Kendra laughed at her sister. You have to be up even earlier than I do. Anyway, that's what family does. I love you. You needed me and I came. End of story.
I'll walk you out.
Galen looked to Jack.
Get her settled. I'll keep the guards. Can't see wasting them since they're here already.
Great, more guards. Renee frowned. They couldn't protect her anyway if the attack was a magical one done over a distance. Still, Kendra knew, despite her sister's annoyance, she felt safer in the presence of Galen or Jack and the guards. Kendra didn't blame her either.
Stop whining. I'll see you later today.
Love you. Hey, how'd you get here so fast? Max brought me. Renee looked to her and back to Galen. Don't forget she rode over with someone. Make sure she's taken care of. Galen merely stared at Renee for a long moment, and she grinned sheepishly. Right. I'm sure that's already done because I'm married to the most efficient and careful men on the entire planet.
Precisely.
Galen winked and escorted Kendra out to the main room, where Max reclined on a chair. Very much the king he was in line to be. Relaxed. On the surface. But Kendra had felt his power from the other side of the door in Renee's bedroom. Even then, as he sat on the chair, she saw the tension there, the energy bound up in his muscles, waiting to strike if and when it was necessary. No one would ever steal a car from him. This made her a bit cranky, as her car had been stolen just the week before, and found totally trashed some 60 miles west. Galen looked at her askance for a moment.
Max? Hell no. No one would dare.
She started to laugh, but then the snap of Max's attention landed on her, and all she could do was stare at him as he stared at her. In the background she knew Galen spoke. Max answered. Other big giant males stalked around looking menacing. Funny how Kendra had found herself used to, even comforted by, at times, the new reality of her life in Boston. Max knew the moment she'd finished, felt the subtle and delicious shift of her magic. He loved that about her. She was rich and spicy with power, a scent so heady it made him drunk whenever he was around her. The first time he'd laid eyes on Renee's sister, he'd been hooked on her scent, the sound of her voice, her prickly demeanor. Oh, how he loved that she could be so bitchy. She was a woman who would brook no bullshit, though he had the feeling she hadn't always been so. As a human, even being a powerful witch wouldn't overcome the prejudice some of his jamboree would feel about her. As such, any woman he'd bring home who wasn't a shifter needed a strong will. When he brought her home the first time, and he would, she'd need to set the tone. He'd talk with Renee about it, knew his parents would be behind the relationship, as would Galen and Gibson. The rest would be hers to win over or scare into leaving her alone. He had a plan for the future of his jamboree, a plan to leave behind the rules that reinforced the prejudices of the past. Kendra would be integral to that, a partner in the future of his people. Kendra was it for him, the person he'd been waiting for. His father had always told Max he'd know it when he finally met the right woman. Mainly, Max had thought that had been a bunch of woo-woo bullshit. Until Kendra. He'd been dating someone until right after she'd come to town. It had taken him a little while to be sure his attraction to Kendra wasn't just about her ass, and God knew it was the finest ass in all creation. Damn, he loved each and every mouth-watering curve Kendra Kellogg possessed. Once he'd known it was more than chemicals dancing around between them, he'd broken things off neatly and carefully and given himself some time between the breakup and the asking out. Not that he'd stopped thinking about her, or that he hadn't spent every moment creating a plan of attack. He was, after all, a predator. Now it was time. He didn't like it that they didn't share enough intimacy to have him come into her apartment and have him stay the night. If she'd been aware, things would have been different. She'd have either bloodied him for getting too close, or pounced on him if she wanted him. She wasn't aware, though. She was human, and his behavior needed to reflect that. He wanted her to be totally safe, totally comfortable, and watching her just then sent his cat pacing with wanting her. He stood, loving the way she greedily took in how he looked. Sending her a raised brow and a smile, he held a hand out. "Ready?" Taking his hand, she sent him a look that went straight to his toes. "Thanks. I'm sorry you have to run me home. I'm sure you have to be tired too."
"It's my pleasure to take you home, Kendra. I only need about 4 hours sleep each night anyway. I'm often up at 4 so I can work out before I go to the office."
He walked her out, sending Galen an annoyed look when he hugged Kendra. Gibson, of course, saw the look and delighted in not only hugging Kendra, but kissing her cheek.
"Come on, let's get you home so you can rest a little before you have to be at work."
He shot Gibson a raised brow, promising retribution as they walked past. His brother, unimpressed, rolled his eyes and flipped Max off. Punk. He wanted to drag out his time with her, but saw the fatigue written into her face.
"You're not getting enough rest,"
he said as he stopped at a red light. "It'll be better in a few weeks, once I get myself situated here better." She blew that little lie with a yawn.
"How's school?"
Kendra had recently started teaching a 3rd/4th grade combo class at a private magnet school. He knew the school was very prestigious. The judge he was appearing before in just a few hours had 2 kids who went there. "I haven't been there long enough to know a whole lot, but from the experiences I've had so far, it's really good. I'm lucky to have the opportunity to work with the rest of the faculty and the students. It's a sister school to the one I taught at back in California, so it gave me a bit of weight in the hiring process. The opening was right exactly what I needed and where I'd fit best." She shrugged. "It was meant to be."
"Yeah, I think so too."
He pulled up in front of her building. It was a decent enough place. Had been Jack's before, so it would be safe, though probably smelled of wolf. Max managed to hold back a sneer. Not that he didn't like wolves. He just didn't want his woman smelling like one, a male one who'd mated with his brother and sister-in-law. He could get past that part because he knew for sure she'd be safe there. The place was also close to Renee, which was important to Kendra. Near the T-stop she took to the school since her car had been stolen. Well lit, though he'd been looking for those little fuckers who'd stolen her car. He would find them eventually. Gibson was on it. No one stole from their people and got away with it. He hated the very idea of her being without a car, even in a city as mass transit friendly as Boston. And he really hated that she'd been taken advantage of by thugs.
"Is Renee going to be all right?"
He sent her that damned raised brow when she moved to grab the door handle, and she sighed heavily.
"I'll get the door."
"It's really not necessary," she said as he opened it for her.
"Of course it isn't necessary."
"So you're doing it why?" He laughed, brushing her hair from her face.
"Because I want to do it. I like doing it."
"Oh. Why?"
So full of questions. "Because I want to take care of you. It pleases me."
Her frown was more of confusion than anger or fear. She had the sweetest line between her eyes, most likely from her tendency to wear every single emotion on her face. Not that he'd say so. Females tended to get pissed off when you pointed out any wrinkle, even if it was one he wanted to smooth away with his lips. "It does? Well then, Fascinating," he'd flustered her. He didn't resist his desire to slide his thumb over that line between her eyes. She relaxed, slightly leaning into his touch, most likely not even knowing it.
"No need to say anything. Right now, anyway. Time for rest."
She shook her head with a sigh, apparently letting go of whatever it was she was going to say. "Renee is fine. The wards are holding. She's growing, and her control of her power is also growing. I gave the place a look. There's nothing inside that's bad. She's just remembering things. I'm sure Galen told you."
"Some."
He frowned, hating that she and Renee had to shovel the emotional shit their piece of crap father had left in his wake. The memories she's regaining, well, Kendra paused, the pain on her face. I hate to say it, but for a time anyway, it was better she didn't know all this. Probably kept her safe. What could she do as a child with that anyway? But she's not that child anymore, and she's fine now. Stronger than most people assume. He brushed his thumb over the dark smudges under her eyes. What he really wanted to do was to pick her up and take her to his house. Wanted to get her a mug of tea, a hot bath, a massage, and lots of sleep. Oh, and sex. But mainly the taking care part because she needed it.
You're both strong. Now I'm walking you to your door.
It's really fine. My place is safe.
I'm sure it is,
he murmured as he hustled her up the steps, waiting for her to unlock the outer door. You're just going to leave your car?
We went over this before,
she snorted. Some people have all the luck. He laughed.
We'll get you squared away with this car situation.
My insurance is getting me a check. No need to square away anything. She unlocked her door and he went in first, taking a deep breath and instantly going hard. Christ, her scent drove his cat nearly as insane as the man. Not even a hint of wolf. It was a sexy, fertile witch, and it brought a moan he had to tamp down. The cat had more patience because he knew she was his, but the man knew it would take a lot more than being his to lure the sexy Kendra Kellogg into his life and keep her there.
All clear. Just you in here.
And now him. He smiled when she couldn't see his face. Really? Golly, I'm pretty sure I said that already. God, he was messed up. Just the sound of her sarcasm made him have to fist his hands rather than haul her to his body and kiss her until she melted.
You did. And now I can heartily agree with your assessment. Go to sleep, Kendra. I'll see you later today at Galen's.
He went to the door but paused, changing his course and moving back to her. She looked up at him, her sleepy green eyes wide.
I forgot something.
What?
This.
He leaned down, careful not to touch her or he'd have her clothes off in 5 seconds, and kissed her. Just a soft, slow brush of lips against hers. She opened her lips to him, the sweetness of her mouth tempting him to do more. Instead, he made himself stop after one last nip of her bottom lip.
Sweet dreams. Beautiful Kendra.
He left, smiling as he caught sight of her peeking out the window at his car, running, sitting next to the curb. Inside, she watched him drive away, her lips still tingling from the unexpected and very lovely kiss. She'd wanted more, wanted his hands on her, wanted him to take her to the mattress and be inside her. Max was the kind of man she'd never imagined would be interested in her. But he was the kind of man she understood without a doubt would know his way around a woman's body. Despite his broody, bossy ways, she liked him. She just didn't know what to do with him or how to handle him. He wasn't a man to be handled. She understood that, but she also realized he would never stay with a woman who didn't push him back and keep him in line. That sort of man took work. She wasn't opposed to hard work. She just didn't know if she had it in her to give it to him. Chapter 2. Kendra watched her sister as magic flowed through her and into the room. Renee's magic was vibrant and green. It soothed and caressed. There was so much within her sister, so much untapped power. She would be as powerful a witch as their mother had been. They'd both been gifted through that line. Watching, Kendra remained quiet and centered, the hum of her own magic, fiery and bold, a constant as she remained in balance. She'd never imagined how lovely it would be to be able to teach her sister how to use her gifts, how to be the one who unlocked these miraculous doors for Renee. So much love and trust there between them had helped Kendra immensely. Her magic came to her easier, smoother, and with more focus since she'd moved to Boston. Try to control the ball on the far table. Renee breathed in deep and breathed out, a tendril of her magical energy sinuously moving to the small globe on the dining room table. The ball rose as a grin of delight broke over Renee's features. Kendra's surely matched. Excellent. Now back down. Renee did so, carefully placing the globe on the table, and unspooled her energy, taking it into herself once more, and letting it dissipate. She turned to Kendra. "I totally did it." She hugged Renee. "You did. You're doing a great job. I'm proud of you." "You are?" Renee's smile widened, and Kendra wanted to smack their father for the number he'd done on Renee and her self-esteem. "Of course I am." "You're a natural." Kendra shrugged. They both were. Born to wield magic. "You're doing fabulously. You won't need me in a few months." Renee shook her head. "Now that I have you here, I can't imagine life without you. I know you gave up a lot to come here, more than I could possibly ask you to." Renee tried to look nonchalant, but they were connected, and finding each other again had reinforced that connection. She felt Renee's worry that Kendra would leave. Kendra took her sister's hands. "As it happens, I like it here. I'm afraid you're stuck with me. I can't imagine my life without you either." She liked the opportunity for a new start, as she thought briefly about the protection order she needed to get now that she'd settled in Boston. The fact that Ronnie was all the way across the country was soothing to her. Renee's surprised look twisted in Kendra's heart, so surprised when people expressed their love for her. Startled to think people loved her. Kendra sighed inwardly, angry at the way Renee had been raised, hurt that it had been without support or love, with hatred and derision aimed at her powers when they should have been groomed and celebrated. She knew what it felt like to be loathed for her gifts, but in Kendra's case it had been a few years. For Renee it had been daily during all her formative years. "Thank you," Renee smiled. "What's the news with Max?" She blushed. "Nothing to report. He's all pushy, lays a kiss on me and then nothing for 3 days. I'm not being fair," she snorted. "He did call me, just to check in, when he couldn't make the game a few nights back. And then he texted me to say he'd be on some case and couldn't break away, but he would soon. He's ridiculously hot. He's overwhelming sometimes. I don't quite know how to deal with him." Renee laughed. "Yeah, well, it doesn't really get easier. Shifter males are all overwhelming, pushy, hot to have sex all the time, control freaks, who also bring you tea when you're sick and even buy tampons when they're out and about and you need them. It's going to be impossible to resist Max. Not that you're biased or anything. He's like the president of your fan club." Kendra sent her sister a raised brow. "He's certainly a favorite of mine. Those De La Vega men are yummy. Only one is an idiot." The two of them started laughing and couldn't stop until tears ran down their faces. Kendra cherished this connection more than she could ever express. Her sister was a good woman, smart, loving, compassionate, and as talented as Kendra. They just seemed to click together. The intimacy they'd found, the depth of friendship and sisterhood, had startled both women. Sometimes Kendra's affection seemed to overwhelm her sister, but once she acclimated, she took it into herself, feeling bold enough to love in return. On the other hand, Renee had so much love around her right then, it made Kendra a little jealous. Sometimes it was lonely, her new life in Boston, but that kiss 3 nights before had blown her socks off. The beginnings of something with the very handsome Max de la Vega were taking hold, and she liked it. A lot. Idiots or not, they're easy on the eyes. If we could only duct tape Carlos's and Beth's mouths closed, it would be perfect. However, none of that matters because neither Frick nor Frack will be here, and visiting your house is like a hot guy buffet. Renee grinned, looking a lot like their mother. "I know. Now that they all hang out over here so often, I really love getting home from work. And now you're a magical superstar who can use her power like a rock star." "I'm working on it. This calls for a prize, a treat, a celebration. Let's go get chili dogs. You must feel like celebrating." Her sister was a fairly health-conscious woman. Kendra rarely saw her eat what could be termed junk food. "I knew you and I were related." Renee laughed as they stood and headed out into the living room area of Renee's home. Both women stopped and just took in the sight in front of them as males of all shapes and sizes, though all equally gorgeous, lounged and watched a game on the big screen, including Max. Wow. Kendra blinked at the absurdity of it, at how much testosterone and alpha maleness had gathered all in one place. Max was at home there, in the group, and yet apart as well. They grinned at each other as the lazy gazes caught the newcomers to the room. Nice thing was that even with a giant screen full of football, they turned to take the women in. A girl could make her way through a pretty crappy day with that memory. Max sent her a look that tightened her nipples, a look filled with sensual promise. She couldn't remember the last time a man looked at her that way, and damn, it felt good. It was then she felt it, the darkness hurtling toward them. Without thinking, she threw a shield up, stepping in front of Renee. Her lips moved as she began to weave the spell, hoping the protection warding on the outside would stop whatever it was. Stop! She raised her hands as she walked from the main room out onto the landing. Her regular vision had clouded as she used her other sight to keep track of the spell. The interior of the house choked with magic. Magic from the wards, from the spells she and her aunt had put in place, from Renee and Kendra, and all those shifters had their unique sort of magic as well. She couldn't get enough of a read with all that interference, though she was able to use it to strengthen her power, using some of the things Mary had taught her before she'd gone away. What can I do? Renee put her arm around Kendra's waist. The soothing energy filled her as they linked. Cat and Wolf joined them, enraged males in full protection mode, prowling around, their growls bringing the hair on the back of Kendra's neck up. It can't get past the wards. She relaxed slightly, but never let her attention waver from the threat outside. The fullness of all that magical energy washed over her, adding to the strength of the walls to keep the darker magics out.
Is it the same as before?
Jack, Renee's other husband, asked, a reference to a series of magical attacks on Renee just a few weeks before. She listened to it, thought over it before looking to her sister. What do you see, Ren? Renee licked her lips. It seems not exactly the same, but similar. I agree. She turned back to Jack. I need to go outside. Keep her in here.
Oh, no fucking way.
A male just slightly smaller than a mountain stepped in her path. Being kept somewhere by force was a real hot button. Max or not, no one kept her where she didn't want to be. Not anymore. She stepped back, trying to remain rational. I have to go out there to get a better read. All these shifters in here have their own sort of magic, and I can't see through it to get an accurate estimate of what's going on. His eyes weren't brown. They were deep black, like obsidian, and they gave him an air of absolute authority and no small amount of menace. He was fiercely beautiful, and standing so close to him sent all sorts of signals rushing through her system. She swallowed and blinked a few times. He noted her deliberate distance and didn't move to close it, but she could see in his body language that he wanted to. Part of her responded, liking it, but not all. He clenched his jaw and she watched, fascinated, until he finally spoke.
Just because Renee was the target before doesn't mean you won't be now. You could be in as much danger as she is. Now that it's known you're her sister, how can you be sure you won't be attacked like she was?
She frowned. Because what she is altogether unique due to the nature of her bond with Jack and Galen. I'm just a run-of-the-mill witch. Powerful, yes, but not that unique. In any case, it needs to be done, Max. With the dream Renee had just a few nights ago, we have way more questions than answers. She moved to walk around him and noticed the other shifters standing nearby were all watching Max, as if he was the boss of her. Galen put a staying hand on her forearm.
Maybe you should stay inside.
It was the wrong time for it. It wasn't his intention, and she knew it, but she recoiled anyway, hating that weakness in herself and her inability to get past it. I need to go, she muttered, and tried to get down the stairs.
Wait, Kendra, are you all right?
Galen followed her, and Max moved past them both to block the door. I need to go outside. She grabbed the door handle, but as Max leaned there, the door wouldn't budge. It's gone! Let me out! She flicked her gaze up into Max's face and watched his temerity fade into something else. Not so much pity, but he definitely saw into her more than she wanted him to. Let me go, she growled at him. He smiled slowly, chasing part of her fear with tingles of pleasure. She had no idea what to make of him, at all.
Galen, why don't you take everyone back inside and call Rosemary?
Max's voice was a sexy rumble, though he kept his body against the door. His attention shifted back to her.
You and I need to talk.
I don't think so, Buster. Our aunt isn't in town right now, and I'm as good as she is at this point anyway. I'm telling you, it's gone. All this was for nothing because you're blocking my way. I don't like being held someplace without my permission. And she didn't like how her voice broke. Max, move out of her way. Renee pushed her way through the throng of men on the stairs and down into the entry. Can't you see you're scaring her? She said far more quietly. Kendra took a deep breath and rubbed her fingers across her eyes. Stop talking about me like I'm 5. I need to go and you're going to let me, Max de la Vega, or I will make you. She stared him in the face and held her ground, even though she knew the headache she'd get in a few minutes would make her sorry.
Doesn't look so scared to me. Your sister's made of pretty stern stuff.
He broke his gaze with her to look to Renee.
Sweetheart, why don't you go back upstairs with Galen and Jack? I'll make sure Kendra is safe.
Max's look at her sister was fond. It was clear he liked Renee, and Kendra liked that. However, he was still a giant, hot lunkhead. Kendra, are you all right? Renee asked, undaunted by all that testosterone. Not right now. She just couldn't. We can talk about it another time. I'm okay now. I just have to go. Max, back off. Her pint-sized sister pushed at Max, who looked over her head to Galen, who shook his own.
Kendra, did I hurt you?
Galen asked, concern clear in his features. No, you didn't. She wanted to reassure Galen, but the whole situation was beginning to be embarrassing and she wanted to escape. Really, I don't want to talk about this anymore. Ren, you and I will get that celebratory chili dog tomorrow, okay? After school is out, I'll meet you at the smoothie bar and we'll go. You can stay over tonight if you want. Have pizza with us? Renee took Kendra's hands. She kissed Renee's cheek. Thanks, I appreciate it. But I think you understand about being alone sometimes. Renee nodded. Why don't I drive you home?
I've got it, Renee.
Max stepped away from the door, moving everyone back a step. Kendra used that moment to grab her coat and head out onto the porch. Stay inside, Ren. You call me if it comes back. Trust the wards and yourself. She waved and jogged down the steps, taking a deep breath of the nearly freezing air into her lungs. At the gate, Max caught up with her.
Where do you think you're going?
I'm checking the warding, Dad. That okay with you?
As a matter of fact, no. You're making yourself a target right now. What if this thing is still out there waiting?
Of course we're being watched. I'm not even a freaking next in line to the throne of a Jaguar Jamboree, and I know that. But we're being watched one way or another anyway. Why not know who it is? Why not work to gain as much information as we can? With all we suspect right now, I can't believe you'd expect me to just pretend and hope it all goes away.
You know, you're a school teacher.
She blinked up at him. He was so random. And? He growled and paced.
You're supposed to be quiet and gentle and sweet.
She began to wonder if he'd knocked his head on something. Oh, is that how I'm supposed to be? I wasn't aware. You're the one who's totally random. I thought lawyers were supposed to be logical and liked gathering information before making judgments. Did you huff Lysol or something? What's wrong with you? He stopped and stared before a laugh erupted from him. A deep, smooth, smoky laugh that sent her agitation fleeing. What? Now you're laughing at me? Ha ha ha, I'm a super sexy jaguar. Fear me, she mimicked. One of his eyebrows rose, and again with the tingles. The man was a menace.
Do you think the laugh was to make you afraid? Why do I get the feeling that when it counts, you push past the fear and do what needs to be done?
Not like anyone else was going to do it for her. Max, don't try to analyze me. I'm not that interesting. He stepped close, not scaring her at all, just sort of stealing her breath with his nearness.
Sexy, huh?
Leaning down, he nuzzled at her neck, and she had to trap the groan she wanted to give him for it. I'm trying to work here. She hated that her voice had turned breathy, like a cartoon character vixen.
So am I. You've been here long enough to get to know us, see how we are. It's in my DNA to protect.
Is it in your DNA to sniff me? He did it again, and this time she couldn't stop the soft sigh of pleasure from sneaking through her lips.
It's because you smell so good. You're magic. The way your skin smells right here below your ear drives me crazy. 3 days since the last time I could touch you, taste you.
He licked her neck and she nearly came. Her heart thundered in her chest as she stepped back. Shut the fuck up while I do this. You're messing with my concentration. She stomped off, annoyance warring with warmth and undeniable sexual chemistry. She was right. There was no threat outside. Still, Max shadowed her as she moved, giving her the space to work, but keeping close enough to protect her if it was necessary. He didn't hide his smile. He messed with her concentration? Every breath Kendra Kellogg took messed with his concentration. Even now as she did her magic mojo thing, moving around the yard efficiently, spilling that vibrant red gold and warm magic in her wake, she took up every bit of his imagination and attention. She was spirited, a huge turn-on for him. He loved women with an attitude, smart, strong women who didn't take any shit. He liked her sense of humor and the way she stood up to him. His cat loved her strength. She was fierce, the kind of woman a man could trust. It probably wouldn't have been as bad if he hadn't scented her, twice. That was more intimate than the brief kiss of a few nights ago. Now her scent lived in him. God in heaven, she smelled like sex. Like sex and comfort, like strong, sexy witch. And his cat practically needed his insides to get to her. No one had affected him the way she did, and he didn't quite know what to do with it. What he did know was the idea of her being in danger had set his cat so close to the surface he paced, on guard, just to keep his human skin. He supposed it was simply another piece of proof that she was indeed meant to be his.
"What do you sense?"
he asked, when she got near enough to hear. Nothing, not even a smear of the dark energy. Maybe I was wrong. She frowned, shivering. He stepped closer, giving her some of his body heat, satisfied when she stopped shivering. He doubted very much that she'd been wrong about the attack, though. He'd watched her from day one. She seemed to have a good grasp of her abilities.
Do you really think so?
She thought for long moments before shaking her head no. I don't think I was wrong at all.
Me either. I think you felt it, and I think your father has something to do with it.
Her eyes lost their warmth at the mention of her father. Not that Max blamed her. He'd be right in line behind Jack and Galen when they finally got hold of Andrew Parcell, or whatever the fuck the man was really named. Now that we know he had some involvement in my mother's death, I have every reason to believe he's connected to these other attacks. I don't like that, at all. I don't know what they have of Renee's. That bitch most likely kept her hair or other physical links. I think I found a way to nullify that. When I find them, they're going to have to deal with me. I will find them, and they'll pay for what they did to our mother and for what they did to my sister. Christ, when she got bloodthirsty, it only made him want her more. He cocked his head and spoke before he meant to.
You enchant me.
That startled her. I do? Is that a good thing? He laughed.
Yes. No. Hell, I don't know. But I like it. I plan to explore that. With you, just so you know.
She pursed her lips. Oh. She licked her lips, as if she tasted the words before saying them. All right. He shook his head at her when she grinned his way. She'd hit him like a bus, knocked into his consciousness when he had least expected it. Kendra Kellogg left him dazed and wanting more. Earlier that afternoon when she'd come out of Renee's office, he'd just watched her. Fascinated that she looked like Renee and yet totally different. Her chic curtain of super straight hair, short enough to leave her neck exposed, those eyes, far more green than brown, thickly lashed, and God, the dimples at each corner of that fucking delicious mouth. She was the loveliest thing he'd ever seen. He'd been deep in a naughty fantasy about a hunt to see if she had any more freckles than the ones he'd seen on her forearms, when her entire demeanor had changed, became serious. His cat had gone on instant alert, dragging all the cats in the room into hypervigilance with him. Jack had as well, the wolves cued to his moods in much the same way. Max had stood, looking to her, taking his cues from her. It had been the way she'd braced her feet apart and took on an onslaught of dark magics that had really pushed him into acting at long last. The kiss had been impulsive, but now he was decisive. He wanted her, and she needed to know it. Her ferocity had pushed every last one of his defenses away. That and the look of fear and panic when Galen had touched her, and he'd blocked the door. The recoil she was able to get control of fairly quickly. Someone had done that to her, hurt her so that despite her strength, her first instinct was to try to make herself smaller and get out of arm's reach. Like prey. Every male on the landing and in the hallway had felt it, seen it, and went into overdrive, wanting to protect her. Max did what he always did. He acted decisively, and in doing so, found himself totally off balance and unsure for the first time since he was a teenage boy. Whatever it was, or whoever sent it, it's gone. She looked around the yard, pretending he hadn't just told her he'd set his cap for her. It's fine out here, she said quietly.
Are they safe?
He jerked a thumb toward the house. None of us are safe until this is dealt with, but this house and yard will hold safely. I'll go out to Cambridge tomorrow and talk with Mary.
Mary?
She's a powerful practitioner, a friend of my aunt's. Mary's been away for a month, but left a note that she'd be back this week and told me to stop in. Kendra reached for the gate, and in her full view, slowly but firmly, Max put his hand over hers.
You look shaken. I'm taking you to dinner.
She opened her mouth, most likely to argue. These sisters were quite alike on that front.
You can tell me about Mary and your plans. Fill me in on just how safe you are at your apartment, too. Gibson will only ask me about it tomorrow anyway.
You're bossy.
So everyone tells me. It's my job to be bossy. But you're no doormat. I know it, and so do you.
He reached out and ran a fingertip over the tips of her hair.
No matter who tries to make you feel otherwise.
Why do you want to take me to dinner? Really? Oh, she had no idea. He smiled at her, slow and assessing. Her eyes widened and then slid a quarter down, sexy and slumberous, and all sorts of buttons and levers got pushed at the sight.
I want to take care of you. You look pale. Got a heavy scare. And I like you.
Even if I'm feeling like steak and lobster? She smirked, teasing.
He liked it.
Only his family teased him. It was intimate and showed she trusted him.
Sounds very good.
He held out an arm and she sighed before taking it.
What? You thought I'd be scared off by an expensive dinner? I know just the place, and you can have the biggest lobster in the tank if you want.
And cake?
2 slices, if that's what you desire. Though they make a mean creme brulee you might want to try instead.
If you're sure you wouldn't rather be inside watching sports and eating pizza with your friends.
I'm sure. I can get into a fight over football with Galen any day of the week. My office is only 2 doors down from his. If I need trash talk, I know where to go for it.
He opened her car door and helped her inside, looking up and down the block before he got in on the driver's side. Her scent rose between them, warm, sharp, and vibrant. He breathed deep before pulling away from the curb.
Yeah, that's the ticket, he thought.
He could easily get used to her there in his car. Seems to me you two do more than talk trash. Renee and I tease each other, but I've never broken her nose. He burst out laughing as he navigated through traffic.
You aren't shifters.
Is that why your sister Beth has been such a bitch to Renee? He sobered with a heavy sigh.
Beth has issues, not because she's a shifter.
She's a bitch either way, Kendra murmured, and he laughed again.
She is. But something tells me when you come into the family, You won't take any guff from her.
Come into the family?
I don't believe in pretending not to see the inevitable. You and I are inevitable.
She made a snorting sound. You're pretty sure of yourself. At a red light, he turned to face her.
Comes with the alpha territory. I'm a confident man, and you, gorgeous witch, are an intelligent woman. There's something between us. You and I are going somewhere, and I think it's silly to pretend otherwise.
She bit her lip, consternation on her face. Lights green. Max grinned and kept driving. Chapter 3. The place was small, a neighborhood steakhouse with old-school darkwood paneling and leather chairs. Candles and votives cast spare light into the room, but enough to see where to walk. She didn't need light to smell the heaven wafting from the kitchen anyway. Max, it's good to see you. An elderly woman toddled over, and Max grinned at her before hugging her and kissing both cheeks. Rapid-fire conversation in Spanish followed. They talked about her. The woman thought she was pretty, told him it was about time he saw women who had curves, flesh, hips made for babies. Max said he liked that too, grinning as he requested a bottle of the house red and the house special for both of them. After the brief introduction, they'd settled into a booth she felt swallowed up by. I don't drink, she murmured. He looked at her, surprised. A stab of satisfaction lanced through her. He'd had her so off balance, she was glad to turn the tables on him. What, you think a white girl like me can't speak Spanish? Or are you offended I don't drink? She teased. He laughed.
Kendra, I'm pretty sure a girl like you, white, brown, or pink, can do lots of things. You're just that able, I suppose. As for you not drinking, he shrugged. What's it to me? What would you like instead of wine?
Coffee would be good, and then water. What's the house special?
Steak and lobster. Meat is aged, lobster is the size of a compact car. Stuffed mushrooms and a salad to start. Creamed spinach, a baked potato to go with the entree, and creme brulee to finish. Or you can have the chocolate decadence cake if you prefer. It's an excellent meal.
Yeah, if you're 4 people.
She laughed. I'll eat your leftovers.
He looked up as the server brought the wine and some glasses.
Thank you. Can you bring coffee, please? And water.
She liked this man, liked the straightforward way he dealt with everything. He wore his confidence like a second skin. He radiated everything she'd ever thought was good in a man. Everything she'd not chosen before. A basket of bread called her name, and though she knew she'd get filled up, she couldn't resist. Want a slice? This is so good and warm that I'm feeling generous, and I'll even butter it for you.
Who am I to refuse such an offer? Yes, thank you.
Their fingers brushed as he took the bread from her, and heat radiated through her. And then he brought it to his lips, and she had to clamp down on her nerves to keep from shivering. Cripes, she'd never found herself so ridiculously hot for a man that merely watching him take a bite of bread would make her wet. The food began to arrive at a leisurely clip, and Kendra relaxed as her blood sugar balanced. She'd overdone it and depleted her body as well as her magic. If she hadn't had Renee and the shifters in that room to tap into, she'd be in bed with a blinding headache. Before Mary had left, she'd given Kendra some exercises, ways of gathering the ambient, magical energy all around to enhance her own power. Without that, dealing with whatever had attempted to attack them earlier would have been far more difficult.
So, tonight,
Max started as he speared a mushroom and ate it whole. What about it? She busied herself with the food in front of her.
Why didn't I notice your snarky streak before today, I wonder? I mean, I noticed your bitchy streak, and I mean that as a compliment, but the snarky thing.
He paused as his gaze roamed over her face, lingering on her mouth before he spoke again.
Well, that's new.
I just grow on people that way, I suppose. Or maybe you never looked closely enough. Most people didn't. Most people looked at the surface and never went any further. He leaned toward her, giving her that focus she knew shifters were known for. Renee had told her once that when she first met Galen, when he'd given her his total attention, she'd been totally swept off her feet.
Oh, I've looked Kendra, I've looked and looked and looked some more.
She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry.
Tonight when Galen touched your arm, you reacted. I scented panic when I blocked the door, but you're not afraid of me. What was it?
She turned her face away, not comfortable with the topic. I wanted to follow up and go outside. The fresher the trail of whatever magic is used, the easier it is to identify and possibly trace back. In fact, because they possess artificial energy, magic they've stolen rather than magic they've earned, it's easier to use to track them. I was eager, and you all treated me like the stupid, fragile woman who didn't know her ass from a hole in the ground. Of course I reacted. He sat back as they brought her coffee. She stirred, and he watched.
Did you know that jaguars are keen hunters? We'll just wait and wait until the perfect time to pounce.
He poured a glass of wine.
This doesn't bother you?
No, it's fine. I don't drink, but I don't care if you do.
Okay, then. So here's the deal. I'm going to let you go for now, but you need to know that I know your answer is bullshit. My nose doesn't lie. And as it happens, I'm damned good at reading people.
While she loved and didn't fight her physical attraction to him, he seemed to have this power to look right through her. It left her exposed and uncomfortable. He leaned back in his seat again.
Tell me about yourself. You pick the topic.
Why?
Why are you so defensive? I like you. I want to know you better. You can't know people unless they tell you things about themselves. Help me here. Unless you don't want to get to know me.
She might have felt bad, but the look on his face as he said the last bit was so arrogantly confident she couldn't. She was, despite herself, charmed. I'm a teacher. I love junk food with an unholy level of devotion. She paused when a plate was slid in front of her, heaped with a lobster the size of a terrier, and a steak so beautiful she nearly wept. Wow, this is... wow! The server beamed. I'll pass that on to the kitchen. Max nodded his thanks, turning his attention back to Kendra.
Why did you become a teacher?
She ate a few bites, feeling a lot better when she had. My aunt is a teacher. I grew up around teachers. It just seemed like it was what I wanted to do and be for as long as I can remember. I like my job a lot. This school I just started with has a curriculum I really believe in. My kids are all smart and reasonably well behaved. She smiled, eating more. Oh my God, I'm so glad we came here. This is the best restaurant dinner I've had in a very long time. This place is special. He grinned, obviously pleased.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. The owners are my godparents, so I grew up coming to eat here. All our family birthday dinners were here. Still are.
That was nice, and it made him even more attractive. Why are you a lawyer?
My dad is. My mom was, now she's a judge.
He gave a one-shouldered shrug, and she tried not to goggle her eyes when they brought him a second steak. She wanted his metabolism. But no, her ass got fat when she ate too much, and her car got stolen while he could eat 85 pounds of food and be all hot and hard. The man left his car running at the curb, for heaven's sake. Hers got stolen in less than 2 months since she'd moved to town. He was gorgeous, intelligent, well-spoken, sexy, arrogant, well-educated, powerful, and he had a lot of money. Jeez.
What on earth are you thinking?
His voice broke into her thoughts. Just that I wished I had your metabolism?
Mm-hmm. Anyway, like you, when I was a kid, I knew it was what I wanted to be. In high school, I was on the debate team and we had a mock trial. I was hooked on trial work from then on. I love my work. I'm good at it and I get to do it with my family. It's a nice continuity in my life. I like it when things work that way for me.
Somehow I don't think they'd dare to be otherwise. I'd love to see you in action someday. She picked up her coffee and drank, mentally kicking herself for saying that out loud. He smiled in that way of his and it made her tingly.
Anytime. You're in the building to see Renee just about every day. You should stop by my office.
He leaned in.
Have I ever shared this recurring fantasy I've had about you, me, and my desk?
She nearly choked on her potato as heat flushed through her. She wasn't going to let this slip through her fingers, not when she wanted him so much. You haven't. What's stopping you now? The smile turned seductive and then secretive.
You haven't told me about these magic lessons you're getting from Mary.
Are you a tease, Max de la Vega? Get me all worked up only to fall back? She crossed her legs, squeezing her thighs tight. He raised his brows for a moment as a smirk played around that mouth of his. Mischief lit his eyes, and damn it, she fell a few more feet for the man.
I like you, Kendra Kellogg. You keep surprising me in all the best ways.
He took her hand a moment, kissing her fingertips.
Here's the thing. I want to know you. We'll have sex. Lots and lots of it. I plan on taking my time exploring every lush inch of your body. For now, the lead-up will be foreplay.
Are you always this pushy? Reluctantly, she pulled her hand back because, well, how could she get to her lobster without it? And if she wasn't going to get laid, she might as well eat some lobster.
I am. My mother says if she'd have let me, I'd have run the entire household by the time I was 6 or so. But she's a bigger alpha than the rest of us, so I learned from the best. I'm bossy, but not controlling. Yes?
She held his gaze for long moments as he saw right to the bone. She wanted to run and hide, but at the same time, just having someone know her felt good. Taking a deep breath, she said, "It's not what you think."
What is it then?
He took her other, non-lobster-eating hand, concern on his face. Could she tell him that story here? She didn't think so. No, not here, not right now. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have even said that. You unlock stuff inside me and I find myself blurting things out.
Why don't you drink?
Gah. So, what did your mother do when you got all nosy and pushy? You know, to get you to back off and let a girl eat her 8,000 calories in peace? He laughed.
You and she like each other. She told me the other day that she thought you'd be perfect for one of us. She thought maybe Gibson. I disagreed quite firmly with that.
She'd met his mother twice now, and the woman was scary, but also vibrant and absolutely gorgeous. She had this energy, the sort of personal gravity that pulled people's attention to her. Most shifters felt different to her than humans. Their energy, that personal electricity that was the spark for her own magic, seemed to be set at a lower frequency. A hum she felt in her belly. But most of them, while extraordinary, were of a normal kind of extraordinary, which she knew seemed odd, even to her brain, but it was the only way it made any sense at all. But some of them, the ones who tended to be more alpha in their group structures, possessed the sort of magic laden with something else, unique and delicious. It made them charismatic, some more polarizing than others. Compelling. Max was this way. His mother more than his father, though his father had something else, a paternal energy that was strong but nurturing and protective. It was rare for her to feel so comfortable around a man his age. His jamboree respected him and feared him, because he was the kind of man who took care of things when they needed doing, no matter how they needed doing. Kendra had to admit she was wildly curious about shifters, most especially the cats. There had been some literature she'd come across online, but not a lot, and some of it was mythology. They'd kept to themselves and attempted to keep details of their lives, vulnerabilities and strengths out of the public eye. Too much attention left them dangerously exposed. As a result, most of what she knew had come from Renee, and what she'd seen herself in the time since she'd come to Boston. They didn't mate the way wolves did. There wasn't a mystical bonding that occurred after sex. Instead, cats had this intensity of connection with their imprinted partners. It looked very much similar to the wolves' bond from the outside. The details of the imprint seemed to hinge a lot on the individual cat and his or her partner, but there was some sort of chemical attraction and scenting along with biting. Not like a vampire or anything, a mark of sorts. Kendra couldn't help the warmth in her belly at the thought of Max biting her like that. Max waited, she knew, understanding she was running through all sorts of stuff in her head. The smile he wore told her he knew she had sexy time thoughts in there too.
I can't wait until you know me well enough to share whatever it is you're thinking right now. When Galen first brought Renee around, I thought she wasn't good enough for him. She was human, and despite where we are now, there's still prejudice. And she is, hard to get to know. So they met and Galen left on a trip with Armando. Armando is the baby of the family. He and Galen are tight. Anyway, Galen starts telling me about this woman he's in love with.
He worked his way through the rest of his food, and she pushed her still heaping plate toward him before she exploded. And she had to leave room for cake.
So, he brings her to Sunday dinner at the house. Now, as you know by this point, Sundays with us are way more than just a meal. Any given Sunday, there will be 30 people there, kids all over the place, lots of playing and physical stuff. So he brings this woman, and she's tiny and sort of scared, and I took one look and judged, which is stupid, of course. In the first place, Galen is not an idiot about people the way he is about football, and because after about 3 hours with her, I knew she was so much more than what she appeared to be.
She frowned because he was sweet, and a big part of her, though not the part where her clit resided, hated that he was, because she wanted to keep him away and he just kept sliding under her defenses.
I'm telling you this because I want you to know me too. Because that's how you build something. Story by story. Experience by experience. I ask because yes, I'm nosy. But mainly because I want to figure you out. I want you to let me in.
She didn't want to talk about other stuff, but she could share her plans and the things she was learning. Mary is teaching me how to channel other energies. She's been teaching for 30 years. Rosemary and she were friends back in the day. She knew my mother, too. She paused when a platter filled with desserts appeared with a flourish. I hate to say this, but I am so full. I don't think there's any way I could eat another bite.
You can have a bite of mine.
Max ordered the creme brulee.
Just one, and then I won't pester you again.
I suppose I can do that. I wouldn't want to disappoint you or anything. She took a spoonful and moaned at how outrageously delicious it was. You so weren't kidding. When she opened her eyes, it was to find him staring at her in that way of his, and it sent a shiver through her.
I love to watch you eat. You know that? You're a sensual woman, graceful and carnal even.
He took a deep breath.
Tantalizing.
She fanned herself with her hand. You're such a tease. He tossed money down on the table and stood.
Will you invite me to your apartment, or come to mine? I want to talk with you more, and we should probably be in private when we do.
She nodded, pretty much unable to speak because he looked so good and she wanted him so much. Chapter 4. On the way out, she'd stopped to talk with Letty, thanking her for the lovely meal. Max liked that she'd shown respect for a woman who was a great deal like family to him. Kendra had ended up at his side, close enough for him to shelter with his body, as he walked her to the car. She'd simply been where she was meant to be. A silly thing, maybe, but it spoke to him and his sense of fate. I can buckle my own seatbelt, thanks, she said dryly, slapping his hands back.
I know you can.
He would take her to his house, let her scent live and breathe in his space, show her what he could build for her, make for her, keep her safe and happy in. It would be more than a house. It would be a home, for both of them.
So, Mary is your aunt's friend and she's a witch like you?
Yes, sort of. Mary, when she was young and left California, ended up with some not-so-nice people. It's where she learned the darker kinds of power and magic. Then she met Craig. That's her husband. He's not a witch at all. A scholar, actually. She was a student in his class, using him to get at his access to the museum's antiquities collection. It was all very cloak and dagger. Instead, she fell in love with him and gave up dark magic. But she understands it, understands how energy works, and unlike a lot of other witches, she's not afraid of other traditions. She said it while looking out the window. His brain was still crowded with all the details from dinner, from her deliberately sexually provocative behavior. Under the surface, Kendra Kellogg was even more interesting than on the outside. She'd rolled with his demeanor, had batted away his overly pushy behavior, but had opened up as he had let him in a little, on her terms. In short, she was proving to be his match on every level. How could he resist that?
And she's teaching you how to deal with whatever is trying to get to Renee?
He paused.
And you. Damn it.
Of course. Of course, she was a target too, and of course she hadn't said anything. Though it was so obvious he wanted to kick himself. She wasn't only a target due to her proximity to Renee. They'd want her for her, taking the threat against her to a completely different level. What's the harm in being prepared, even for a highly unlikely situation? Anyway, the kind of practitioners we're dealing with, the ones attacking Renee, aren't super powerful. Most of us aren't. So I figure it's a good thing to know how to deal with them. They use magical properties and energy differently. Hard to fight it if you don't know how. Some of them don't use magic at all, at least not the kind Renee and I have. Fascinating. Though he was pissed off at himself for missing the clues, he loved how she thought about things. Strategic, orderly, a lot like he did.
How so? I mean, how do they use magic differently?
In the most harmless of cases, they learn to manipulate other forms of energy to use them in their own spellcraft to supplement what they've already got. Not all of those things are bad. Tonight, for instance, I was able to grab the magical energy in the house to supplement my own. Shifters have theirs. Renee lent hers to me, and there's power in the wards, too. They just go a step more and use negative but hugely powerful forms of borrowing or theft. Blood, pain, fear, death, all expel a great deal of energy. What I have is natural. I was born to it. It comes to me when I call. That's magic. What they have, when they steal energy to enhance spells, is not the same. They call it magic without the K. It's harmful to the wielder, and it's gained without permission. You can't control that sort of energy, not all the time. It's not natural.
They kill for power?
His cat didn't like that one bit. Yes. Or they hunt around to find people like Renee, who have unique magical signatures or properties. She, Galen, and Jack have this loop. They didn't set out to create it, it just is. But she has this huge draw, which makes her a target. Not that she knew how to use her magic before she mated with Galen and Jack, but her reserves, her infinite possibility has always been there. I believe this is why Susan kept her around. Of course, you add in the way Susan tormented her as a child, and you get a pretty heady brew of power to leech off. Negative emotions have power too, power enough to have been attractive for these witches, mages, whatever they want to call themselves.
Essentially, they're thugs. Renee's energy is special, so she's like extra HP or whatever.
HP as in video game power?
Haters to the left, Kendra. I like a little video game action to get rid of a hectic day. Who doesn't?
People who have sex instead. She blinked up at him, not even pretending innocence.
You have a one-track mind.
Not that he was complaining about that. Not at all. I never claimed otherwise. I like sex, Max. I'd like to have it with you. He held back a grin, instead sending her a mock frown.
Stay on topic. You're distracting me.
That's the point. She paused. Fine, yes. The last mage who attacked her tried to drain her. I could touch you right now and take your magic, probably without you knowing it. Hell, I used some of your energy earlier. It's a physical law, right? Energy doesn't dissipate, it merely becomes something else. So all paranormal beings I've ever come across, witches and shifters, though I hear it's the same with fae and vampires, have magic. You slough it off. She shivered. He would have drained her and then done a right to use her all up. Her connection to Jack and Galen included. I don't know how it would affect them, but I doubt it would be good. He whipped into his driveway, the garage door sliding up as his guard gave him the all-clear sign from his perch on a nearby rooftop. He'd slid into a higher state of alertness as she spoke, adrenaline driving him on. He had to calm himself down, or he'd bring the cats around him into that state of agitation as well. The situation had been calm for a few months, The mage who'd attacked his sister-in-law had been dealt with, and they'd been keeping an eye on some men who'd been connected to the attacker. But the newly recovered memories Renee had resurrected, implicating her father in her mother's death and the abuse that followed, complicated things. He had no idea how to combat this foe. Until Renee, he might have ignored that such things happened. But she was his, part of his family and his jamboree. And now Kendra, who his cat reminded him, was also his.
How do we stop this and keep you safe?
He hustled her from the car until she pulled her arm free and took a look at the place. I told you, I'm working with Mary on it. Our lessons start again and she's teaching me how to draw better on the energies floating around so that I can bolster my own. If I don't, I get sick, depleted. It leaves me vulnerable. Once Renee gets a better grip on her magic, she'll start with Mary too.
Vulnerable how?
Using magic means I spend it. Use my reserves. If I get attacked and I'm depleted, I have less to defend myself. And that was unimaginable to him.
What can I do?
She paused and looked up, into his face. You're doing it. You can't fight this with claw and tooth. Or you can, but only after the magical stuff has been neutralized. The witches have to do that part. I'm encouraging Mary and some of the others I've met here in Boston to get together to try to form a loose organization. Massachusetts doesn't have the best history with witches. You might imagine it's not as easy as one would assume. Many witches pretend not to be, or pretend to be dabblers, New Agers. She shrugged. Nothing wrong with that, of course, but that's not what I am.
You should come out, like we did.
He led her into the main part of the house. The heart, as he liked to think of the living area where the kitchen, dining, and family rooms all flowed together. Yeah, that's what we need. A panicked human population drowning us or firing us from our jobs because they worry we'll harm them with our warts and evil ways.
Come on now, don't exaggerate. We've had our troubles here and there, but it's not all been bad. It's not the same as it was during the witch trials.
He nearly stepped back at the sight of so much anger on her face. Instantly he hated that he'd pushed whatever that button was in her. I'm not talking about the trials. Prejudice dies hard. And slow. Her voice was agitated, strained.
Don't do that.
He turned her, tipped her face to his, her expression awash with pain, anger, hurt. Not knowing how to help her, he kissed her forehead.
Don't close up and go away.
She shook her head once, struggling with whatever it was she needed to say. So complicated, his little witch. What do you want from me? He could have softened it, could have pulled the punch, but it wouldn't have been right. He needed to lay it all out for her because he had no intention of anything but being with her.
Everything.
Eyes widened. She took a breath and stepped back. I just got everything back for myself. I'm not ready to give it to anyone else. I don't know if I ever will, Max.
Remember the discussion we had earlier about cats being patient hunters?
You don't scare me. She meant it like a tease, but he took it deadly seriously.
Oh, yes, I do. Not in the physical sense. We both know you could have blasted my ass away from the door tonight if you were truly scared. But in here... He tapped a fingertip over her heart. I'd have had a hell of a headache if I could have made it to the front walk without passing out. Yeah, I could have blasted you. She neatly sidestepped the part about being scared emotionally. Still, she'd told him about the physical toll of using her magic. Just a small bit of herself, another piece of the puzzle she gave him. So you get sick or feel weak after you use your magic? Mary's teaching you how to feed more power into yourself, then, to meet these mages with as much power as they have.
I rarely use my magic. That's the way it's supposed to be. I maintain it and practice. I learn new spellcraft and better control. My reserves are good because of that. But when I use a lot of it at once, it can deplete me physically. Bloody noses, headaches. I need to eat or I feel sick. Sometimes a witch can lose consciousness. If I don't know how to pull this other ambient magical energy from around me, I would lose a direct confrontation if it came to that. They are playing with a totally different set of rules, and I have no plans to play nice when it comes to my life or the lives of the people I care about. Rosemary and I fought him off that first time because we were together. But I don't know if I could have stopped him on my own." He expelled air, wanting to hit something.
"So what can we do? The cats are behind you, the wolves as well. That's a lot of muscle. Tell me, and we'll fix it."
She paused, her expression one of surprise. With a soft look, she reached up to cup his cheek. "You can't. I mean, in a normal situation you could. You're strong and fierce. But this isn't normal. If they try to physically harm me, or her, or any other witch, and you were there, you could stop it. But this won't play out that way. If we, witches I mean, can't defend ourselves, we're meat. I don't want that. So I'm learning as fast as I can." His cat was of two minds on this. The man, however, was far more concerned about the risk this situation posed her.
"Damn it, Kendra. Essentially you're telling me that you're the one who will have to fight these mages one-on-one? You're saying it's down to magic? That Tooth and Claw can't do anything? Because that means you're defenseless, and I have a serious fucking problem with that."
She didn't say anything. What could she say? It wasn't that she liked it either. It would be very nice to have a normal life with no one trying to harm her or those she loved. But that wasn't what she'd been confronted with.
"You have to teach Renee this too, so she can help. You can't do this on your own. Teach me. You said we have our own kind of magical energy."
"You do. I'm of the opinion that it's to do with your change. The power to achieve a totally different form, to change the mass of something. It's indefinably complicated. But you don't use it like I do. You work your magic with that, with your shift. It's not something you can use in any way than how you already do. I'm already teaching Renee, Rosemary as well when she's in town. The exercises I have Renee doing now are the bridge to the sort of skills she'll need to even try a magical draw without hurting herself or someone else. Today, though, she instinctively came to me, offered her magic. I think she'll be able to begin some rudimentary stuff with Mary within the next few weeks if she can continue at this level."
"All this time you've been training her, not telling her about this other depletion of magic thing, but readying her."
He tried to lead her to the couch, but she balked. "Hold your horses. This is some place, Max."
"Don't think you can change the subject."
He led her into the main level of the house, and she blinked, looking around. "You live here alone? Tour me."
"I'll tour. You'll talk."
She rolled her eyes. "Giddy up."
"The family room, dining room, and kitchen."
She walked around the room, looking out windows, touching the spines of the books on the shelves, peering at the framed pictures that sat on every surface he could fit them on, scenting his things in a way she couldn't have begun to understand the importance of, but doing it nonetheless. He watched her from a nearby chair, but stayed in place, content to drink her in.
"Tell me why you didn't let anyone know what you were doing."
She turned to look at him, tucking her hair back behind her left ear. Clearly there was an internal struggle, but at last she sighed. "I didn't tell you because, well, I want Renee to be able to use her gifts with pride. She hasn't had that. It's not right. I wanted these first months to be a time when she could get rid of that shame. Why scare her any more than she is already? My sister deserves a break, even if all I can give her is a short one." He closed his eyes briefly. She hadn't known where her sister was just 4 months before. But in that time she and Renee had grown close, had clicked in the way he did with Gibson and, most of the time, Galen. Kendra Kellogg had moved across the country for her sister, had undertaken her own training to possibly save her damned life, and the life of her sister, and on her own. Of all the things women had done to gain his attention, the dresses, lingerie, makeup, whatever it had been, this was the most powerfully attractive thing he'd ever witnessed. Family was as important to her as it was to him. These weren't words used to manipulate. No, they were deeds. He pushed from his seat, never taking his gaze from her, loving the way she didn't flinch at all. She waited, breathing a bit fast, for him to reach her. Rather than continue the tour, he backed her against the wall and leaned in, meaning only to kiss her briefly. Instead, she made a sound threaded with raw desire, with need, and, as he drew his teeth over her neck, pleasure. And then he was lost to her, lost to the call of her scent, of the feel of her, solid, curvy, warm, and pliant. The need for her built, filling him up so it was all he felt. Her taste was right, as it settled into his system.
I should stop,
he murmured as he slid his palms down her sides, dropping to cup her ass, hauling her closer. She rocked against him, arching to touch him more. Go on ahead, he laughed, licking up her neck, finding her mouth, and taking all she offered, needing all she was. Her tongue slid along his, her fingers tangled in his hair to hold him close. With an iron will, he broke the kiss.
A tour. You wanted a tour.
No, I wanted sex. You're being coy for some reason, though we both know we're going to end up in bed. She swallowed, hard. She stood there, infuriatingly exposed to him. Comforted by the way he listened, the way he hadn't argued or tried to take over, but still wanted to. She saw the war of it on his face. He'd given her that space, the respect that she had to do it. At the same time, oh my God, did he have the domination in a hot, romantic way down. The way he'd crowded her against the wall hadn't alarmed her at all. She was wet and achy, and she wanted more. In that dark place, deep inside, she wondered just how dominant he truly was. For a year, starting the day she drove away from the house she'd been a virtual prisoner in while married to Martin, she'd shut herself down. It had been the only way she could find the space to get over it, to process and be done with it. And then it had burst open. Her desire, her sexuality, and her need to be touched and loved came back with a sudden shaking fury, and she'd decided then to never turn it off again. Sex made her feel alive. She loved it, and there was no way she'd feel shame about it again. Max was someone she wanted on a whole lot of levels. There was no need to pretend with him, to be anything but who she was. It was comforting and jarring all at once. He challenged her, seemed to respect her ability and independence, while being bossy and nosy, and suddenly just in her business. She should have felt nervous about it, but she liked it. She was way more perverted than she'd thought.
What on earth is going on in that brain of yours?
He murmured, drawing her into a nearby room, a great room with high ceilings and a lovely view. He settled on a couch, and she allowed him to pull her to him, nestling her against his body. I don't know how to say any of this. It all seems nonsensical and farcical, and yet here I am, snuggled up against a man who can transform into a jaguar. You're infuriatingly bossy and totally sexy, and it feels like you're stalking me. Not in a creepy way, but like, gah, never mind. I want to have sex with you. A lot. He snorted.
Working on that. Don't be so impatient. Do you have somewhere to be? I like to take my time. You're worth the effort, and I want to hold you right now. I want you snuggled against me. I've longed for this, and I aim to enjoy every minute I can.
Snuggling was a very good description of what it felt like to be with him on the couch. He'd enfolded her in his arms, and she fit against him just right. He was warm, hard where he was supposed to be, all big, strong man. He made her feel safe, safe without being crowded, held without being imprisoned. If they could bottle up whatever it is you're doing right now, you'd be the richest man on earth, she said without meaning to. The sound he made was caught between a growl and a laugh.
Don't panic, but I'm imprinting on you like crazy.
I don't know if I should panic or not. I don't know what you mean.
I mean, Kendra Kellogg, that I want you, and that means I really want you, all of you, and from now on. I should warn you, I'm not a man who loses very often. I like to get what I want.
He nibbled on her ear and she moaned. I'd panic, but that feels... Oh, man. Let's let this thing play out slowly. You don't need to declare your love for me right now. We've only known each other a few months. But I do want you, and I'm quite amenable to being exclusive, as I'd need to harm anyone who tried to pry me from your arms right about now. He sucked her earlobe into his mouth, skimming it with his teeth. He'd shifted so one of his hands had snuck beneath the hem of her sweater, sliding slowly up her belly to her left breast. Which was good, as Max de la Vega didn't share. He hadn't lied. He'd gone from like to attraction, and then attraction to intense attraction, to the first connections of an imprint in a short time. But long enough that man and cat knew she was the one. He'd never had any intention of having looking for the right woman become a lifestyle. He'd played and fucked, always knowing when the right woman came along, he'd play and fuck her, cleave himself to her, and that would be that. He was not afraid of this at all. He knew what he liked, knew what he wanted, and he was old enough that he'd gained plenty of skills to make that happen. He leaned in and kissed her, at the curve of her jaw, at the hollow beneath her ear.
Good. Let me tell you something, querida. You never need to concern yourself with me wanting to be pried away. If anything, you'll have to order me to stop being a perv and trying to have sex with you every moment I'm around you.
Why don't you, then? I'm here telling you I want you. Take a bite. Here, let me get that started. She reached down and pulled her sweater off, tossing it across the room. He couldn't have taken his gaze from her if something had been on fire right behind where they sat. She sat before him, exposing all that pale, bare skin, and a red lacy bra holding perky, gorgeous tits. Gaze locked with his, she reached up and popped the catch between her breasts, freeing them from the bra.
Holy shit,
he breathed out. Bold, take charge, sexy women. Heaven smiled down upon them because he loved them. She cupped her breasts, all while keeping her eyes on him. You wanted to talk some more? Because, Max, you've been tossing around all that testosterone for months now, and you really shouldn't promise what you don't want to deliver. His eyelids slid partly closed as desire weighed him down, slowed his movements as he stroked fingertips between her breasts. Her breath caught, and he scented the spice of her desire.
You're going to kill me,
he said, holding himself in place. Just barely. She sat, moving forward to straddle his lap so those naked, perfect B-cups stared him right in the eye. Only if you don't have sex with me. The heat of her pussy sat directly over his cock so hard and sensitive, he nearly came when she ground herself over him.
How is it?
He gave in, pressing his face to the hollow of her throat and breathing her in.
I never saw a siren living inside the soft, sweet, feminine school teacher.
Maybe you were too busy looking at my ass. He laughed, reversing their positions, rolling to get her on her back on his couch as he loomed over her.
Could be. I love your ass.
Didn't you have a girlfriend like 2 weeks ago?
We broke things off nearly 2 months ago. Should I be worried that you didn't notice?
She snorted. I noticed everything else. Enough that I thought uncharitable things about this woman I've never seen. Satisfaction warmed his belly that she'd been interested enough to be jealous of a woman who he could barely remember at that point. He touched her lips quickly with a fingertip.
There's no need. I broke it off because I knew I was interested in someone else.
She slid her hands up under his shirt, digging her nails into the muscles of his back. More interest, please.
You're going to scar my fragile psyche with your pressure to go all the way.
Her face lit with amusement. You can just put the tip in. If it's too much, you can stop. I promise it won't hurt. Laughter shook his sides as he dipped down to steal a kiss. But she gave it freely, holding him to her body, rubbing against him.
I'd planned.
He paused to lick over each nipple. Her groan echoed with his.
To take my time with you, to woo you before we had sex.
She reached down, getting his jeans opened up. I hate that plan. I think the new plan, unless you truly don't want to have sex with me, should be having sex with me. We're adults. I don't think you're going to marry me tomorrow morning because we get down. He laughed, rolling off and springing to his feet. He would marry her in the morning if he knew she wouldn't run away from it. That would wait. For a while.
Christ in heaven, you look sexy lying there on my couch, your skin flushed, your nipples hard and dark.
He held a hand out to her, helping her up.
Come on, then.
He sighed dramatically.
Clearly you're a nympho and need some of my special medicine for it.
Well, it's about time. Leading her upstairs, he pointed things out on the way.
Guest bedroom there, home office to the left, full bath, powder room downstairs just south of the kitchen.
All kidding aside, Max, your house is lovely. I like it. He smiled as he turned, sweeping her off her feet and jogging the rest of the way to his bedroom.
Glad to hear that. I want you here, which is easier when you like it.
He tossed her on the bed. There's more than one way, you know. You can keep me coming back with lots of great sex. He laughed, pulling his shirt off one-handed.
Single-minded. It's a good trait.
Chapter 5. Holy wow, was he gorgeous. His upper body was beautiful, muscled, fit. His skin called out to her fingers, her mouth. She gave in, moving to him, needing to touch. I'd say something like, "How'd you hide this body under your clothes?" But I've been watching you enough to know this body was there. Only now that I see it, it's even better than I'd imagined. He leaned into her touch, moaned at her caresses, but he froze in place when she rubbed her cheek over his chest. She leaned away from his body to look up into his face, suddenly feeling awkward. What? Did I hurt you?
No, not at all.
He kissed her, reassuring her.
You rubbed your scent on me, marked me,
He hesitated a moment.
It's very intimate.
His hands went into her hair, sliding through it until he stopped to gather and tug.
And submissive.
She swallowed, hard, knees nearly buckling at the sensation. Oh, it just seemed like the thing to do. He pulled her hair to draw her head back, exposing her neck. She closed her eyes, letting herself float. His mouth cruised, finding a spot he seemed to like a lot, where neck met shoulder. She liked that spot, too.
You taste like everything I love the most. Spicy. Your magic makes my cock hard, Kendra.
He was pushing all her buttons so hard, she thought it a good possibility she'd come the second he got anywhere near her clit. So big and raw there, he stood over her, backing her to his bed. When she'd fallen, body splayed on his mattress, his hands went to the button of her jeans. As he made quick work of them, she kicked off her shoes, helping him get her jeans peeled off. The way he paused and then growled brought gooseflesh, but in the best sort of way.
Tattoos and a piercing. Each layer I peel back gives me an even sexier woman. It's intoxicating.
He breathed it out as he ran his hands all over her, from ankle to neck, tugging on her belly button ring, leaning down to lick over the words on her side, kneading and caressing, leaving her a mass of goo, primed and ready to be ravished. He moved like the cat he was. She couldn't tear her eyes away from him, from the glory of masculinity at its most perfect. My God, look at you. His skin was burnished bronze, stretched over hard, flat muscle that bunched and flowed with supreme grace that didn't blunt the predator inside. His power vibrating from him, humming nice and low in her belly. Everything in her turned to him, paid attention to his presence. His hair was close-cropped, only emphasizing the masculine features of his face. Big, wary eyes. So brown at times they were black. He had this way of looking at her and ripping everything away. He saw right into the parts of herself even she didn't want to examine. His cheekbones were high, an elegant rise on his otherwise rugged features. His mouth was an epic fucking poem. Tempting her more than she'd ever been tempted. He kissed her hard, breaking away with a snarled,
"The scent of your pussy drives me mad."
He fell to his knees, hauling her ass to the edge of the mattress, and taking a long lick, while she still reeled with his words. She arched, back bowed, as a groan ripped from her lips.
"Your clit is pierced?"
he spoke, his lips still against her pussy, the vibration of his voice passing through her, bringing her a tiny bit closer to climax. "No," she squealed out when he tugged on the ring in her clitoral hood with his teeth. No, I didn't mean for you to stop." She grabbed his head, holding him in place. I meant not my clit. The hood.
This is the hottest thing I've ever seen,
he said before flicking his tongue over it, sending bolts of bright pleasure through her body.
Did it hurt?
Yes. She paused, letting herself revel in the way he made her feel. But sometimes I like that. It had been the first time she'd said it aloud. It was the edge of pain she found herself responding to when she got ink or a piercing. He groaned, digging his fingers into the flesh of her ass. His tongue swirled through her pussy, fucking into her body only to move up and tease her clit with feather-light flicks. Climax built, hotter and hotter, closer and closer to the edge, until he sucked her clit and the ring into his mouth with just exactly the right amount of pressure. Her fingers dug into the blankets beneath her body as she rode the pleasure tearing through her. He turned, nuzzled her thigh, nipping it. Still intoxicated with the taste of her pussy, Max leapt up onto the mattress, rolling her, enjoying the boneless weight of her body against his.
I want your taste.
He licked over the line of her collarbone. She hummed agreeably. You have pants on. Not so agreeable this time. One of her eyes opened, and then she turned to face him.
Your eyes go all green when you're pleasure drunk. Your scent changes, deepens. Your magic warms against me as I touch you. Clings like gossamer.
Wow, you're so good. You must have totally gotten pussy. Like all the time? He laughed, unbuttoning his jeans and getting them and his boxers off, so he could return to her as naked and as quickly as possible.
No comment other than to thank you for the compliment, and to say it's still my plan. I happen to like yours very much.
She rose up, laying kisses across chest, licking over his nipples. Speaking of tastes, I like yours. He watched as she moved down his chest. He'd known they'd have great sexual chemistry, but this was more than great. What they had was combustible, nuclear, off the charts, flat-out perfection. Inside her was a warrior woman, fiercely protective of those she considered hers to protect. She would stand at his side in all things, hold him accountable to be the best leader his jamboree could ask for. And sexually submissive. Given the unnamed trauma of her past, he hadn't been expecting that. Given that trauma, though, he'd take it with extra care. Each layer he peeled back, he found something else unexpected and beautiful about her. Or just plain hot, like the clitoral hood piercing. All that was lost when she licked from his navel to the head of his cock. The wet heat of her mouth drove him insane. Slowly, she took him deeper and deeper, her tongue sliding around the head.
Fuck.
He may have growled it, but he couldn't be sure.
That's so good. Right there. Yes, harder.
She made a sound, and the scent of her rose, pushing him closer to the edge. She liked the dirty talk. Good. He did too.
I'm going to come, and while the idea of coming in your mouth isn't one I dislike by any measure, I want to be buried deep in your pussy when I come. Little witch.
He hissed as she kissed down the line of his cock, licking over his balls. Her eyes opened and focused on his as she bent over him, her gorgeous ass swaying as she did.
I think I told you what I wanted.
She blinked, slowly coming out of her pleasure-infused haze. He would have worried he'd pushed her too far, but she smiled then, straightening. That's so? He took her upper arms, watching as her pupils swelled, swallowing up most of the color in her eyes.
That's so. I want to lie back and watch you above me. I know your pussy is nice and slick.
She let out a shaky breath as she moved to straddle him again. Oh yes, this was going to work out so very well. She grabbed his cock at the root, angling it against her pussy. She hummed low, the sound laced with pleasure and tension. Condom, she murmured.
You and Renee don't, compare notes?
Damn it, her breasts were so beautiful. He cupped them, flicking his thumb back and forth over her nipples. Her dreamy look faded a bit and her lip curled. If you tell me you've had sex with my sister, I'm so out of here. He laughed.
No, I love Renee, but not like that. I mean, We don't carry STDs, and you're not ovulating."
She frowned, though she continued to hover, the head of his cock bathed in the wet heat of her gait. Sexy. For the record, Renee does not share the details of her birth control situation with me, though you De La Vega boys have quite the reputation.
"You still with me here? We gotta go for lunch."
Even he heard the strain in his own voice. He wanted inside her so badly, his hands may have shaken if he hadn't been rolling and tugging on her nipples. "Yes," she gasped. He angled himself and thrust up into her body. The shock of it, of how tight and slick she was, nearly sent him over the edge. She moaned, and then, while her gaze was locked on his, began to circle her hips. Now that's sexy. Not as sexy as what he was looking at. In addition to the spectacular tits, an ass that went on for days, and that face of hers, the ink on her sides, curling up and around her stomach, turned him on beyond measure. The dangling jewel in her navel ring and the one in her pussy drove him nuts. He pinched her clit, gently, tugging on the ring every once in a while, just to watch her face change, to see her nipples darken, her eyes grow glossy.
"You're what's sexy, gorgeous. Your pussy feels so good I may die from it, but I'll die happy."
"If you die, I can't have sex with you. People tend to look down on that sort of thing."
"Very good point."
She moved over him as he watched her, content to get his fill of each curve as his gaze roved over her body. She was graceful and strong, and he couldn't seem to get enough. Good thing he was a patient man, and could happily spend the next decades filling himself of her. She hadn't been so full, well, ever. It was the combination of the girth of his very fine cock and the way he looked at her like there was nothing else in the room worth looking at. Every part of her he touched was on fire for him, and the way he touched her. It pushed her buttons in a big way. Dominant, sure, just an edge of rough, but still clearly play, and not meant to harm. All that muscle, all that coiled power and strength, and he used it to play, to incite and turn her on. She found herself smiling down at him, and those eyes stared back. They were dark, but not a flat darkness, a darkness filled with promise, with endless energy and strength. His hands on her body stroked, soothed, and excited at once. Needing more, she leaned forward, bracing her hands on his shoulders. The change in angle brought the line of his cock to brush against her clit in the ring, sending shivers of pleasure through her, over and over.
Fuck, your cunt is squeezing my cock so tight. So good. I'm nearly there, and you need to be there with me."
She closed her eyes a moment, getting ready to deny it was possible, and then he reached between them and flicked a finger back and forth over her clit, and made her a liar. She gasped, sucked under by the intensity of climax with him so deep inside. Dimly she was aware of his snarled chant of her name, his fingers digging into her thigh, the flex of his abdominal muscles as he thrust up into her over and over until he pressed one last time and came. "Good thing you're strong and stuff, because I wouldn't be able to move of my own steam for another few minutes," he chuckled, moving her beside him on the mattress, keeping his arms around her. He traced over the symbols on her skin.
"What are these?"
"Protection spells, runes, words of power."
"Is this something all witches do? Does it work?"
How could she explain it? How the ink had given her power and control over her situation once she'd walked out on her broken marriage? "I like to think so. They are frowned on in many circles." She stretched and smirked when she caught him staring at her boobs. She moved to sit up, but he tightened his arms around her. When she nuzzled into him, tasting the salt at his neck, he actually purred, like a full-body vibrating purr. "I like that," she said, her face still buried in his neck. For all his cuddly ways, she'd seen him in full battle mode, knew he was more than a human man. A big cat lived inside him, and yet he held her gently, purring. Lord, he got to her. Of course he purred. Was she crazy? He'd just had the best sex of his life, with a woman he was totally convinced was the one. and she nuzzled his neck. He loved the way she felt, the scent of sex and magic mixing in the room. She felt right. They felt right. It pleased him, even as she stirred everything inside.
I don't purr for just anyone, you know. Now, you have this way of lobbing a bomb and then skirting away, changing the subject and rubbing on me. This is distracting, to say the least, as your parts were made for rubbing. So, what's frowned on?
A lot of witches of Rosemary's generation and older have lived in fear of exposure, of being misunderstood. I'm sure you understand this. And he did, so he nodded. We learn from each other, from our mothers and fathers, from cousins and friends. We're insular. That was another thing he understood firsthand. Cats were one of the most insular shifter groups, and it meant great suspicion toward outsiders. What I wear on my skin is not solely from my own tradition. There's magic older than what Rosemary and my mother were taught by my great-grandmother. My grandmother has no magical gifts, though she grew up with magically gifted people, so she nurtured that within my mother and aunt. A few years ago, I realized there was more to my gifts and powers than what I'd been taught. After I got divorced, I spent a lot of time simply learning about myself, about what I was and who I was. I started reading, seeking, learning from other traditions.
And some in your community are threatened by that.
They don't trust it. It can be manipulated, used to harm, but I think they're throwing out something they could actually benefit from. Fear is good to a certain extent, but then it becomes something more, something worse. It paralyzes and makes people paranoid. That's not helpful. People like Mary have a lot to teach.
Does that translate into them not trusting you?
She heaved a sigh, wriggling until he let go. He watched, waiting as she sprang from bed and began to pace. The moonlight through the window played over her skin with silver fingers. What have they done for me anyway? My mother had to pretty much abandon me. She was murdered, most likely by our father and Susan. God only knows what she is or who she's working with. Renee was emotionally abused and, as we've discovered, physically too. She had to move when she thought. Interesting.
So what then? Doesn't sound to me like you want to separate yourself entirely, or you wouldn't give a crap what they thought. You do.
She rounded on him, eyes narrowed. Are you playing lawyer ball with me? He laughed.
I'd never dream of such a thing. Though, if you wanted to play something, you can come by and we'll use my desk to all the best ability we can. My chair would hold our weight easily.
Her annoyed look melted away as she bent to find her clothes.
Why bother getting dressed? I'll only have to take them off again when we fuck in an hour or so.
I need to go home. He wanted her to be here, wanted this to be their home. Not that he'd share this with her just then. Another shifter would have understood, but he needed to take things a little slower with her.
Why is that?
He sat up and moved to her, enfolding her in his arms and holding her close. That's what people do, she said, her voice muffled, as she made no move to leave his embrace.
Which people are here with you and me right now?
He began to sway, smiling against her hair as she moved with him. You run with some pretty stunning male specimens, should you, want to bring any of them around. Though he couldn't see her face, he knew she smirked. She broke into full-throated laughter as he swept her up and tossed her on the bed again, scrambling atop her.
Galen's situation is different. I don't like sharing what's mine. And you and I both know you're mine.
One of her eyebrows rose imperiously, and his cat approved. I know we have great sexual chemistry. I'm willing to concede we're dating even. Yours, though? I'm no one's but my own.
Not to own, little witch. Never that.
He kissed her softly.
To cherish and take care of.
I still need to go home.
I'll sleep there, then.
He rolled off and tossed her clothes in her direction.
I'll pack a bag. What are your plans for tomorrow?
She pulled her panties back on, and he sighed.
I do like you naked.
You're full of it. Cripes. But she smiled as she said it.
Tenacity is a gift, little witch.
It's a pain in my ass, that's what it is. She snorted. Tomorrow I have to work and then I'm going to meet Renee. We're going to B&G Oysters for lobster rolls. It was supposed to be chili dogs, but she texted me earlier to suggest an alternative plan. She tells me I have to try them there, and who am I to turn down such an offer?
Am I invited? I love lobster rolls.
She rolled her eyes as she struggled into her bra and pulled her sweater back on. I doubt you've eaten a lobster roll. Ever. Look at you. She waved her hand his way.
Shifter metabolism, my beautiful witch. As it happens, I'm a big fan of lobster rolls, though not to argue with your sister. But I like Neptune Oyster Bar better. Perhaps we'll go there next, just to be sure. Come on. It'll save us the charade that you won't have guards trailing along.
Renee has guards trailing along. I, on the other hand, am free of that. She smirked and he laughed, pulling his jeans on.
Yes, well, I think you're a woman who prizes honesty, so I'm going to tell you right now, you'll have guards too. Gibson has no doubt worked out a plan for when you and Renee are out to keep the number of guards low enough not to attract a lot of attention. But it's going to continue for the foreseeable future.
She spun, narrowing her eyes. You what? You can't send fucking werewolves and jaguar shifters with weapons to an elementary school? That's ridiculous. I have a job. I'm trying to build a life here, and I won't do that with henchmen at my side. She sailed from the room and he followed, grabbing his suit bag and the toiletries kit he always kept at the ready.
I'm not sending werewolves or jaguars to the school with weapons strapped to their bodies like Rambo.
He stepped into his shoes.
They'll be discreet. They know how to do their job.
Why are we talking about this like you have an option? He nuzzled her neck, scraping his teeth over her skin, loving how she leaned into his touch, probably without even knowing she did it.
We're not, because I'm not asking for permission. There are people out there trying to harm you. This is not acceptable to me. I have the ability to protect you, and I will. Period.
She pushed at him, but he stayed long enough to kiss her neck again before stepping back. I can protect myself too, Also, newsflash, I'm not one of your cats. You're not the boss of me. He laughed.
Of course I'm not the boss of you. You don't need me to be your boss. That's not what this is anyway, and we both know it. It's happening. I have no plans to make it stop. Now, on to happy things. Will you make me breakfast in the morning before you go to work?
You better sleep with one eye open.
All this sex talk just makes me hotter for you.
Chapter 6. She didn't really know what on earth to do about Max, other than indulge him, which, she had to admit, was fun and usually a win for her. Over the last 2 weeks or so, he'd simply become part of her daily life. He called, texted, stopped by, paid attention. He wanted to know what she thought about things, wanted to hear her opinions on every subject imaginable. They'd spent more time simply wrapped in each other's arms on his overstuffed couch than in his bed, though they'd spent a lot of quality time naked as well. She'd never been so well matched with someone before. In bed, they burned up the sheets. He was inventive, attentive, and had a seemingly unending well of energy. Out of bed, they poked at each other, played, teased, and discussed. He'd become essential to her. It had felt as if she'd looked up and found him there. And she liked it. Oh, sure, she'd seen him several times a week before that. He was Renee's brother-in-law, after all. But this was different. He had a way of taking up space in her head, in her apartment, and in her heart. He took care of her. He touched her in a way that made her ache, filled her up, made her feel beautiful, strong, and capable. And yet, he sheltered her when he could, and sometimes even when she told him to back off. He was infuriatingly pushy, nosy, bossy, so intelligent it set her back on her heels at times. Sexy, nurturing, and loving. It freaked her out, even as she loved it, even as she wanted to get used to it, wanted to count on it. And no matter how much she tried to hold him off, he simply flowed in, like the tide. Renee looked up from where she'd been making Kendra a blueberry smoothie. Huh? Sorry. Max, he's like the tide. He's coming into my life whether I want him to or not. Renee laughed, pushing the smoothie her way. I put extra protein in it. You'll need it. She gave Kendra a look, so Kendra gave in and took a drink. Thank you. It's actually good. Renee's smile was mischievous. I should be offended that you sound surprised every time you come here and drink my smoothies. Kendra laughed. I'm sorry. You're right. I'm so proud of you, and I say goofy stuff. Renee's grin softened. No need to apologize. I know you're proud. Now, back to Max. Here's the thing. You don't want him to not rush in like the tide. I've seen you two together. You're connected, like whoa. And like Galen. Only worse. He's a right pushy bastard. Lucky he looks so good. I don't think he'd get away with half of it if he wasn't so handsome, Imogene de la Vega said, as she came to stand next to Kendra. My, don't you look pretty today? She leaned in to kiss Kendra's cheek, and then squeezed Renee's hands across the counter. Imogene, of course, looked flawless in her chic business suit that probably cost a month's salary. The woman was nearly 60, and she didn't even look 35. Tall, taller than her husband, her thickly braided hair was held back with an equally chic band at the back of her neck. I do? Please, look at you. Kendra waved at her. Imogene laughed. Oh, this thing? I just threw it together on my way out this morning. She paused and laughed some more. I lie. I had a luncheon today with the law students I'm mentoring. This is my successful judge suit. Cesar gives me side-eye when I wear it. I swear the man is wearing the same suit we scraped together the money to buy for his first day in court.
Should I be worried about this gathering of my favorite women?
Max sauntered in, wearing a suit that did far more exciting things to her insides than Imogene's had. He looked smooth, elegant, and yet, even with the dapper suit and nice shoes, that edge of danger in him was still obvious. In the eyes, the set of his mouth. Damn it, he was irresistible. I was telling your Kendra that you only get away with as much because you're so handsome. Of course, I hope you're giving her more reasons to stay than to go. He bent to kiss his mother's cheek, rubbing his own along her jawline. Kendra had seen it before, affectionate and also a sign of rank. She liked that Max respected his mother the way he did.
Kendra doesn't let me get away with much, Mommy. Why do you think that is?
He grinned as he leaned over the counter to kiss the top of Renee's head. Because she's not a pushover. Nor is she wrapped up in all this jamboree ranking business. She's your match. This is a good thing for you and for the jamboree. Kendra blushed furiously. Dealing with his family always seemed like a job. There were so many of them, and every one of them came with some sort of list of issues. They were fiercely loving and loyal, but the most political group she'd ever dealt with. She wasn't sure she was up to the task, though it did make her happy that everyone else seemed to think she was. Well, let's not be hasty. We just started dating and everything, but also he's so pushy that it sometimes happens that I oppose whatever he's trying. He brings it out in me. Max laughed, taking her cheeks in his hands, tipping her face up and kissing her soundly.
There's hasty and there's fate, little witch. You're my fate.
He shrugged, like it was that easy. You're going to scare the girl away, Max. Imogene shook her head at Max, though her eyes seemed to be lit with the same mischief his were. She turned her attention back to Kendra. How about you come to dinner on Sunday? It's time you came around. You may not believe in fate, though I bet you do, but you know this thing between you and Max is serious. You may as well come to dinner and meet everyone. I know they want to meet you. She didn't give Kendra any time to say no. She just dropped a kiss on her cheek again and squeezed her hands. Imogene winked at Renee, who laughed and blushed. You too. You know how much I love to look at Jack. He's so pretty. Wouldn't miss a Sunday, and you'll spoil Jack more than he already is with all this attention. Max will give you all the details. I'll see you soon. Imogene sailed out, holding the coffee Renee had made her. Kendra turned her attention back to Max, whose smug smile made his lips look even more delicious. Your mother is scary. Max looked down at her, stepping close so he ate up all her personal space, and she didn't make a single move to stop that from happening. Having him that close made her dizzy in a most delicious fashion.
She likes you. She knows you're going to change things, shake them up. Aside from her first impression of Renee, which she admitted herself was wrong, my mother has a very good gut sense about people.
Nothing like having unrealistic expectations of the new kid, she mumbled, and he bent, kissing her quickly.
You're special. She sees it. I missed you today. I got yelled at by the judge for my client's stupidity. I didn't have time for my afternoon snack, and all I could think about was you.
She frowned momentarily, worrying that he wasn't getting enough calories, and then realized he was trying to change the subject. You're trying to distract me.
No, I'm trying to entice you. Then I can say, Kendra, please come to my house for dinner tonight. Stay over. I love it when my sheets smell of us.
A shiver ran through her, and Renee busily wiped the counter down just to their left. Totally eavesdropping. He grinned, knowing he was embarrassing her, and she gave in and smiled at him. I'm worried that if I keep giving in, I'm only making you more spoiled. He pretended to be crestfallen, the rogue.
You know I'm your servant in all things.
Renee made a gagging noise. You're worse than Galen, and I thought that was impossible. Anyway, she can't have dinner at your house, she's having it at mine. Galen was supposed to tell you earlier today. She narrowed her eyes at him, looking him over. I don't see any blood, but with you two, who knows? Did you two punch each other at lunch or something? He winked.
Not today, but tomorrow is another day.
He laughed.
I've been in court since 9, and I just finished about 15 minutes ago. I'm sure there's a message on my voicemail. I walked into the building when I scented my lovely Kendra. I needed to make my way here to rub myself all over her.
Kendra looked back at Renee, who rolled her eyes at her sister.
Galen is a good cook. I'll bring wine for us.
Max tipped Kendra's cheek, kissing her again quickly.
For you? Rosewater lemonade. I made a little trip down to my favorite Middle Eastern grocery and found the rosewater.
He was impossibly good at this. Rosewater lemonade was one of her most favorite things in the world. She tiptoed up to whisper in his ear, You're very good to me. I notice these things and appreciate them. Even if I don't let you make all the decisions, you're so getting lucky later, just so you know. She went back to her heels, but he banded an arm around her waist to hold her. His eyes lit with something only for her. A smile touched his lips.
Already am lucky. I like making you happy. Come up with me so I can get my things and I'll give you a ride home.
Thanks, but I need to go by Mary's for an hour or so before dinner. I'd planned to leave from there. I'll meet you at Renee's. I'll bring a bag, she added, to soothe and to affirm. Funny how they both seemed to need that. She hadn't told him the insurance money came for her car, and it sucked. Not nearly enough to replace her old car with something as nice. She had the money, but she didn't want to dip into her savings right then. She'd moved cross-country, and until she built it back up, she wanted to leave the money in there alone in case of an emergency. She'd keep on taking the tea and save up for the car she really wanted. But he was a man who simply wanted to make things happen for his people. If she didn't keep him reined in, he'd buy her some giant luxury armored car or something. She hadn't told Renee either. Not so much because she worried Renee would tattle, but she might mention it in front of Jack or Galen who, also being control-freak males, would want to step in and handle it as well. Which would have meant some mess of 3 alpha men all trying to manage her.
Come up and I'll go with you to Mary's and then drive you to Renee's.
He brushed his thumb over the curve of her cheek, and all her promises to herself to hold him off dissolved like smoke. Sneaky, sneaky man.
It'll save gas, and you won't have to take the tea all the way out there. You know, defenseless and alone on a train when fucked up crazy people want to hurt you.
She snuck a quick look at Renee, who nodded at her. All right. Don't think that saving gas comment was even a factor. You can't interfere with anything I do there. Got me? It's important.
Do I look like the kind of guy who would interfere with your lessons?
She and Renee both snorted a laugh. Yes. Yes, you do. She turned to her sister. I'll see you later. Can I bring anything but the cake I made? Nope. Just you two. We'll take the wine, though, Max. You have good taste in wine and in women. Renee looked back to Kendra. Tell Mary I'm excited to be starting lessons with her. I will. See you in a bit. She walked around to the end of the counter and hugged her sister. "Love you. Love you too." Max watched her, his lovely witch, as she interacted with her sister. Their magic swirled around them. He and Jack had likened it to pixie dust, but Galen called it catnip. Galen was probably closer on most days. Heaven knew he loved to simply roll around with her, her skin under his hands, against his lips, her scent wrapped around him. The shifters who guarded Kendra and Renee both loved to hang about and chat with them. Max understood it. He liked to do that too. Beautiful women who gave off magic like perfume in their wake. Of course, his men wanted more of it. Luckily for those men who were entrusted with the care and safety of these two women, they also knew and respected the connection between man and animal, witch and woman.
"You're beautiful today,"
he murmured as they got on the elevator.
"I love you in that color blue."
She looked him up and down. "I'm certainly glad to wear casual clothes instead of suits and all. But you look like you stepped out of a magazine ad." It wasn't as if others hadn't complimented him on his looks or his clothing. It had happened before she came into his life. But when she said it, when she noticed him and said so, it meant more. He wanted to preen around for her. Silly as that sounded in his head, he still wanted to do it. The elevator doors opened, and oh, his lucky day. Beth stood in reception talking with their father. He tried not to bristle. Despite her flaws, he loved his sister and wished she'd let go of her past and embrace the women Max loved so much. Their father, who turned, saw Kendra and beamed? Indeed he did. Smiling like a fool, Cesar de la Vega made his way to them, his arms open.
"Kendra, it's lovely to see you."
He wasn't as big and brawny as his sons, but he was a presence so large he could steal the air from a room, command a jamboree without question or hesitation. But that wasn't who his father was right then. That man, that cat softened and drew Kendra into a hug, the sort he only used with family. The importance of the gesture squeezed around Max's heart, warmed him. "Cesar, how are you?" Kendra, smiling, took his father's hands in her own after the hug broke.
"Better now that I have yet another beautiful woman brightening my view."
He turned to Beth, whose sour expression made it clear what she thought of Kendra.
"Doesn't Max's lady bring something special to a room every time she enters it?"
"Now you're just poking at her, Cesar," Kendra teased. "I don't need your help," Beth nearly snarled, bringing Max's protective instincts to the fore. "I'm sure you don't." Kendra looked Beth over. "Pregnancy suits you." She turned back to Cesar. "It was lovely to see you. I need to run now, but I'll see you Sunday at dinner." Cesar continued to smile.
"Oh, good. Imogen said she was going to ask you today, so I'm glad she found you already."
Beth, robbed of her moment to be a bitch, sniffed haughtily and stomped off. Kendra heroically held her bland facial expression, and the next-in-line part of Max loved it. Loved that she would run the jamboree at his side, and he'd know she could do it. "I'm going to pop my head in and see if Galen is around." She hugged Cesar again, and to Max's surprise and total pleasure, she rubbed her cheek along his father's. With that, she waved over her shoulder to Max and disappeared down the hall. His father raised his brows and nodded approvingly.
"She's a hard ass. You wouldn't know it to look at her, but she's tough. I like that."
He paused a moment.
"Sunday will be important. Does she know how much?" "She understands a lot more about us, about our culture, than I thought she did at first. She asks questions, observes. I imagine she'll know, yes. You have to let her do it on her own." His father's eyes darkened. "It won't mean anything if she doesn't do it herself. She is magic, Papi. Unlike Renee and some of the other humans others have brought around, she will defend herself. And she can. I've seen her do it. She can handle herself, and once she does, they'll back off."
His father tisked.
"Some won't ever accept her, and you're the one who needs to be ready for that. It was hard on Galen, still is. He loves Renee and can't understand why everyone can't see in her what he does."
Max growled low, and his father growled right back.
"Don't you growl at me, boy. Don't you forget who runs this ship. This isn't about that, and you know it. I'm going to be sure she knows she should feel free to knock anyone who fucks with her on their asses. I haven't discussed the issue of taking on a cat, Haven't asked if she'd be willing to change, but she can handle herself either way. However, if a single claw is unsheathed in her presence, I will do my job. She is mine, Papi. Mine to protect, and I will. These cats are mine as well. Yes, I know you're in charge, but I will be someday, and I will not tolerate any threats against my woman. You've begun imprinting.
Max laughed, but it was rueful.
From the first moment I laid eyes on her. In the midst of Renee being harmed and threatened, chaos all around, and she stalked in and helped. Even got bitchy with me and Galen at times. She made Renee better, stronger, accepted her sister in a way that told me she was special and strong. I haven't marked her. The past, her past, stands between us. She's human. They like a slow courtship.
It was Cesar's turn to laugh.
Boy, if you can see the love written all over her each time she looks at you, you're a fool.
He headed to the elevators.
I'll see you Sunday.
He could see it. It was the reason he was content to give her space to figure it out herself. Smiling, he lifted his face and found the trail of her essence, her scent, the magic she shedded as she moved, and followed. Beth thought she could out-bitch Kendra? Kendra's former in-laws had been the most vicious people she'd ever met, and they did it while smiling tightly and holding their religion in front of their behavior, like it excused them rather than condemned. She'd lived around those people for 3 years, and she was still standing. No one would ever take her humanity from her again, least of all some spoiled, snotty jaguar shifter who thought the world revolved around her. Worse, the woman had messed with her sister, and that could not be tolerated. Her annoyance melted when she caught sight of Galen standing in his doorway, speaking to his assistant. When he noticed her there, he smiled and headed toward her.
To what do I owe this visit?
He hugged her. I'm here with Max. He's still talking with your father, so I thought I'd cruise past your office to say hello.
Renee told me she's starting with Mary this weekend. I wanted to tell you thank you for all you've done. She's so much more confident now when she uses her gifts. She's finally believing she's worthy of using her magic, that she can, and do it right.
You don't have to thank me. She's my sister, and more than that, she's a witch. None of us should be ashamed of what we are and what we can do. Our mother can't teach her. She barely taught me. But I can help, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Mary will be good for her.
And do you believe you're worthy?
He asked softly. Most of the time. She shrugged. We're damaged, all of us human beings. But it's about getting past that and being better than the people who try to harm us. Being better than they expect. That's revenge. Galen looked at her for a long time without speaking.
I'm glad you're here, Kendra. I'm glad to be your family.
Max loped down the hall toward them, her attention snagged on how he moved. She'd been in denial, really, or on a deliberate I'm not going to think about that kick when it came to him. It wouldn't help her. She was already in so deep with him that there was no turning back.
Got my stuff. Ready to head out.
He slid an arm around her shoulders when he reached her, kissing the top of her head. Yep, I was just saying hello to my brother-in-law. She looked back to Galen. I'll see you in a few hours for dinner. Galen snapped his fingers.
Crap, I forgot. I'm supposed to invite you both to dinner tonight. I left a message with your assistant.
Galen smirked at his brother, and she snorted at how they were together. It was cute. Though she'd learned from Renee the two brothers would sometimes end up in physical dust-ups, she had no doubt there was deep respect and love between them. And they were predator animals under the skin, after all, even if they were dumb dudes for punching instead of negotiating.
Yeah, I got it. Renee invited me too just a few minutes ago downstairs. Catch your ugly mug later, then.
Galen turned back to Kendra.
Nice to see you, and thank you again. So,
Max began, as he pulled out of the parking garage and headed across the river to Mary's place.
I think you should let me replace your car. It'll make me feel better to know you have it. I worry about you.
Christ already? How had he learned? How the hell did you know? He paused a moment and she realized she'd jumped to conclusions. He'd probably only thought she hadn't gotten the money yet. Damnation.
No what?
The ease in his voice was such a ruse. She knew he was on the scent, and wouldn't let go until she told him everything. Nothing. No one ever said she was smart all the time. He continued to drive with that ease of his, even though Boston was the craziest city she'd ever driven in.
You know I'm not going to let it go. So tell me. Though, well, interrogating you could be quite entertaining. I could lick you until you begged me to let you come.
Even annoyed, she couldn't stop the shiver that worked through her at that visual. Fine. I'm just taking my time to find the car I want. The insurance company's check arrived already.
So why wait? I can take you to a great lot one of our cats runs out in Brockton. You'll be fair.
This was totally her own fault. I want to save up a bit more to get exactly what I want. When I get to that point, I'll be happy to use your friend, though. Thank you, he growled, the sound thick with annoyance.
They didn't give you enough money to replace the car with one you want.
It happens, she shrugged. I'm fine with waiting so I can afford what I really want.
This is stupid, Kendra. I have the money. Why not let me help?
I've already said no thank you. And really, Max, how many people ride mass transit every day? It's safe and easy to use. Totally convenient from my place to the school. That damned smile of his took his lips, curving them upward in a most alluring way.
What if you get stranded?
I can take a cab, or if all else fails, call my boyfriend to come get me. But where do I go that late anyway? I'm not 22 hanging out at after-hours bars. I'm tucked up in bed by 10. Or if you're with me, midnight or so. Max loved to spend hours on sex, and who was she to complain about that?
What if you borrowed my car? You know, just until you get the rest of the money saved. Or you could take a loan from me for the rest if you won't let me pay for it.
Max, it's very sweet that you're concerned about me and all, but I'm fine. It shouldn't take me very long, another 2 months or so. Jack hadn't let go of his lease for the space at his apartment, so I even have a place to park. She'd moved into Jack's old apartment. Had tried to resist. There was no way she could really afford it if he'd charged her market rate. But of course, like everyone else in her new family, including Renee, they'd appealed to safety and space, and relative closeness to Renee's house.
Concerned is a very soft word for how much it freaks me out that these fucking witches are out there looking to hurt you, to rob you of your power and your life.
If they come for me, they'll come for me in my car, or on the T, or in my house, or when I'm getting groceries. Whatever. It's not a lack of a car that exposes me. I'm learning how to defend myself.
And then what?
She turned to him. And then I plan to teach those skills to every witch I know and who is interested, because we shouldn't let fear of other kinds of magic cripple our ability to protect ourselves.
Which will piss off some of your people, right?
Yes. I imagine when it comes down to it, I'll face a lot of criticism. But at least they'll all be talking, even if it's only to criticize me. We are not safe the way we are now. It's far easier now to track us, what with computers and readily available digitized information. He muttered in Spanish and then caught her looking and cursed, in English. She laughed. You keep forgetting I speak Spanish, don't you?
So you're taking on a revolution. You know that, right? You're taking on a huge fight.
Yes. I know staying silent and protecting only myself and my sister is a cowardly, selfish thing. There are too many others who don't know enough and will be at risk. What would you have me do? Keep quiet? Is that what you'd do?
I hate it when you do that.
He pulled around behind Mary's small house, as she directed him to. Do what?
I hate it when you're doing the right thing, and I have to admit that even when I know it's dangerous and I could lose you.
She sighed inwardly. No matter how she tried to hold him out, he simply found a way in, leaving her defenseless against him. I'm not going anywhere but inside to learn some stuff. I asked Mary if it was all right to bring you, by the way, so she knows you're here. Max wanted to meet this woman anyway. Being welcome was a good thing. He wasn't expecting what greeted them at the door, though. Why he'd imagined this Mary as a tiny, bent, shriveled woman, he didn't know. A tall, elegant, dark-haired woman with pale green eyes that didn't miss a trick opened the door, smiling when her gaze locked with Kendra's. You're here and positively glowing, She looked around Kendra to Max, giving him a slow perusal. "You're Max de la Vega, and I imagine the reason for the glow. I'm Mary Pierce. Please be welcome and come inside." Another surprise greeted him as he followed Kendra into the small house. He'd expected clutter, books and crystals and stuff. Instead, it was spare, clean lines, white furniture, dark woods. "I think it would be good for you to watch Kendra work. You have a lot of power, a lot of magic in you. It's tuned to hers as hers is to yours. This feedback loop has helped her, though I don't imagine she's told you. It means she has to articulate how much she cares for you." He smiled, more at the sigh of affectionate annoyance Kendra had made than anything else. He knew she cared for him. It was obvious in everything she did, in the way she let him take over at times, the way she made room for his need to protect and love her.
"I'm glad to hear it. Glad to hear I'm helping, because I have to tell you this whole business makes me very nervous. I'm not a man prone to sitting and letting things happen. She's being threatened. My sister-in-law is being threatened. These are my people. I need to know they're going to be protected."
"I'm giving her the tools to protect herself," Mary countered, still wearing that smile of hers. His cat liked this woman very much. She was strong and utterly capable. This meant she had the ability to protect Kendra in her own way. Mary was part of Kendra putting down roots in Boston, and the man approved mightily. Kendra, obviously annoyed, huffed the smallest of snorts. Knowing she respected Mary, Max understood what an act of willpower it was that she hadn't snapped a comment or two at them. Max held his grin back. Kendra stepped neatly between Mary and Max, taking control again. "I appreciate you seeing me in the evening, Mary. We need to be somewhere later, so if you two are done discussing me—" Mary just patted her hand. "Go on through. I put a chair in the corner for Max. I'll be right in. Through here." Kendra led him down some steps and out into a garden room of sorts. Lots of natural light from the large windows. He took her hand, pulling her back to him. She allowed it, looking up into his face.
"Thank you for letting me in. I know it's hard for you, and I know there's a good reason for it."
"Like the tide," she said softly. "You sweep in and I tell myself to tread water, to go to higher ground, and I just don't. I like it, apparently." She pushed him gently back before he could say anything, but he didn't need to. She'd said it for him. "Now, go sit over there. This will be a short lesson tonight." He obeyed, but he smirked for good measure. Again, things he hadn't expected. Mary's magic was not like the lessons he'd observed between Kendra and Renee at all. Mary bent and placed her palms against the floor. It was as if she was not there. Her eyes were open, but saw a far-off place. "Use your link with Max. Draw on his energy." "No." Max sat, waiting to see where that went. "I haven't asked, and it's not an emergency. I won't do that. I don't even know if it will harm his ability to change. I won't endanger him like that. Especially when I haven't even asked." So fierce, his little witch. He kept quiet, letting her handle it. Of course he'd let her draw energy from him. She'd done it before, though, as she pointed out. It had been an emergency. Mary shrugged and looked to Max. "So ask him." "I didn't bring him for this. I'll take the energy he's giving off, but none still within." The two women's gazes clashed as will met will. Mary nodded once. "I don't think I asked to negotiate this." Kendra stood tall, back straight. "I'm not asking your permission. You are my teacher, and I respect that. However, how I use my magic is my business, and it comes with ethics and rules. I will not go wild all over the population to steal their essence for my amusement. That's not who or how I want to be." The tension stretched taut, until at last Mary smiled. "I'm glad to hear it." Mary nodded once, and Max realized Kendra had passed some sort of ethical pop quiz. "Now that I know you'll be ethical, even when you have access to a well of deep magic, let's talk about how to collect ambient life energy from your surroundings without taking it directly from any living being while they're using it." Max hid a smile, though only barely. He spent the next hour watching Kendra draw things like sunlight, dappled off water, into herself. She looked tired by the end, and he reminded himself to ask her later what sort of toll it took. Mary put her forehead to Kendra's as they finished up. Be sure to eat some protein. It'll help with the headaches. Hydrate, too. I'll see you tomorrow with Renee. She looked to Max. It was lovely to meet you. Can you please excuse us for a moment? He waited for Kendra to give him the signal, and at her nod, he moved to wait for her in the hall just outside the room. Of course, he could hear the conversation anyway. What's wrong? Kendra asked. Not wrong, really. It's... Kendra, your connection to Max has opened up the taps of your magic in a wholly new way. What we did tonight was something that would have taken at least a month to pick up. You did it the first time you tried. He makes you stronger. I can't harm him. I won't do any magic when he's nearby. Max leashed his frustrated growl, but only just. If he made her stronger, that was a good thing. That's the thing. I monitored you both while you worked. The way between you is wide open. You draw on it, but when you expended it, it returned to him. You two are like one being in several ways. The tenor of your magic is different, not weaker at all. I don't want to say what I think until I do some research. We can talk about it next lesson. Rosemary will be staying with me when she's here in Boston. I'll put her to work on it too. If it has something to do with him being a shifter, it's integral no one gets wind of it. We'd be putting him and other shifters in danger if it got out. They'd start hunting shifters to leash to mages. Max heard the fear in her voice. I can't have that. This is my family, and I won't do anything to hurt them. There she was. The fear had melted into anger. Of course. But you know the others are going to resist even more if it gets out. They're fearful enough of outsiders as it is. If they learn about some sort of connection between shifters and witches, many of them will see it as a threat. They're already afraid of what they are. It won't surprise me if they're afraid of what others are. We both know it's going to be an issue no matter what we do. I have to go, but thank you for your help. They began to walk toward where he waited, so he pretended to look out the window at the tiny but plant-filled backyard. Ready? He held a hand out, his love for her filling him up, overflowing. She took it, and their connection seemed to click into place on a level she hadn't experienced before. Their eyes met, hers wide and surprised. He smiled and stole a kiss as he escorted her to the car. Wait, she paused, looking at his car and cocking her head. Problem? He scanned the immediate area, not seeing anything out of the ordinary, not even sensing it. She turned back to him. Do you have a knife? Why? Because. I'm sure I'm going to regret this. He pulled a Swiss Army knife from his case and handed it to her. And she proved him right when she sliced her upper arm open near one of the tattooed marks he liked most. The spice of her blood filled his senses, rich, ripe with magic, thick and velvety. A lesser cat would have had a hard time with the lure of it. As it was, he had to fight the urge to scent her more deeply. Don't crowd me, she said prissily, as she dipped her finger in the welling blood and traced symbols on his tires. He wanted to grab her, shove her in the car, and take off. Instead, he had to satisfy himself with a growl as he moved closer. Take some of my fucking energy, will you? What the hell are you doing? You're going to be sick when you finish. God, you're an old woman, she muttered, surprising him but amusing him anyway. He followed her, keeping watch over the area. His cat paced, agitated, concerned for his female. After a few minutes, she stood, paler but otherwise all right as far as he could see. Certainly all right enough for him to allow some of his temper free. Damn it, Kendra! He pushed her into the car and rustled around through the first aid kit in his trunk. Hold still and let me get it wrapped. She held her arm out, not moving as he cleaned and then bound the wound. Kendra realized she wasn't even that tired. Usually after her lessons, all she wanted to do was go home and nap for a bit. But just then, tucked into the soft-as-a-whisper leather seats of Max's car, she was content. And while not in any shape to run a marathon, she was without a headache and feeling well. He tended to her cut, gentle as he touched, but she felt his temper coming off him in waves. You want to tell me what the fuck that was all about? Do you think I want you spilling blood for me? I want you at 100%.
I want you healthy and always able to defend yourself. I know it weakens you to use your magic. How much?
She found her water bottle and he made that cute little growl as she drained it in seconds. It was dreadful of her to be so entertained by his temper, but it was cute, and she was utterly defenseless against it. He slammed the trunk lid down and got into the car, belting in and staying silent for long minutes.
Should we stop and get you something? Are you all right? I heard Mary tell you to be sure to be hydrated and to eat protein. Should I stop and get us dinner right now?
Do you have any question you'd prefer to have answered first? She knew she was poking at him, but it amused her, and he always looked dangerously hot when he was agitated with her.
Kendra.
One dark eyebrow winged up, and she knew it was time to give him a break. I'm fine. When we get to Renee's, I'll get some juice and grab some cheese and crackers to fill me up until dinner is ready.
That's question 1.
She'd driven with him enough to know she shouldn't watch the road, cars, pedestrians, and whatever else he careened around. Instead, she turned, resting her head against the seat while watching him. Much better than the road any day. I put protective sigils on your car. My blood will carry the magic better. I gave it freely. It didn't harm me. Blood is a carrier agent. It can be used negatively, but not all of it is bad. It just hit me that you're out and about and our relationship is pretty public knowledge. I want you to be safe. He frowned, but not for long.
You're going to take years off my life, you know that? Don't blow me off. This is important.
Hey, Buster, fuck you. I'll do what I want when it comes to protecting the people I care about. And you can't stop me, so get that right out of your head. Don't tell me what's important. Like I don't know myself? Like I'm too stupid to figure it out?
When have I ever said you were stupid? Never. Because I don't think so, and I wouldn't say that.
I'm not some weak child playing with spells because she watched Charmed or whatever.
Hey, that's not my doorbell, Kendra. That's not even my neighborhood.
Yeah, but it's mine. Oh God, she was going to cry. She dug her nails into her palm, feeling the blood seep into the bandage as she flexed, opening the wound again. Shit.
If you told me what it was, I could avoid it in the future. I'm not going to judge you, you know.
He paused, nostrils flaring.
You're bleeding.
I hate that, she muttered.
Too fucking bad. You rode on my car with your blood, and you did it at harm to yourself. I don't like that.
And I don't care.
Why do you have to be so stubborn?
We're here. We'll talk later.
We'll talk now.
He turned toward her, pushing her sleeve up and redressing the slice she'd made. His hands gentled and he looked to her and she saw it. Stark fear. For a man like him, it had to be a pretty unusual emotion. Max was a fixer and she wasn't a problem easily solved. She took a deep breath. You once asked me why I didn't drink. I drank too much at one time and I made mistakes. Big ones. I don't blame the alcohol, but it doesn't make me a good person.
This is about your ex?
I really can't do this right now. I have to go in there, and there will be at least 5 other people, and if I'm all emotional, Renee will notice and feel bad and want to fix me. And I'll be pissy because I've had enough of people trying to fix me.
Don't you understand? I love you. I want to know you. I want to understand you. This is part of what it means to truly be with someone. To be my family and let me be yours. Family shares stuff. You're part of that for me.
She closed her eyes. She should tell him he couldn't love her, but it would have been disrespectful, and a lie. And she knew he did, knew he was sure of how he felt about her. She couldn't say with a straight face that she didn't want or need his love. It was a lie. She did want it. She did need it. No matter how impractical or silly. She'd wanted it for as long as she could remember, and that was the crux of her fear. The stuff about what happened with her ex, that was part of it, but a blip, really. She was over it. Past it for the most part. But there was this place inside her. The insecurity at times was powerful. Deep within there was the girl whose mother had left her, the girl whose sister got to have that mother every day. And then she was gone, and Kendra couldn't get past feeling alone, even surrounded by people. Even having a grandmother and an uncle, being raised by Rosemary, who loved her without question, hadn't quite quenched that unspoken question. Was she a burden? A problem to be solved? Or was she a gift? It was stupid. She got that. Her family, her mother's family, loved her. She saw that love in Renee's eyes, felt it in everything her sister did for her. But what you knew and what lurked inside were sometimes very different. How could she explain to him what it was like for her to see him with his family? When Renee had had a horrible childhood, and Kendra at least was raised by her aunt who loved her. Kendra felt selfish and guilty for even thinking it. He'd never not known what it meant to wonder where he fit, if he was loved. He was next in line, the golden boy who achieved, the male who fixed things. She was entirely sure he'd been that way the moment Imogene gave birth to him. None of those things were subjects she wanted to delve into, especially then and there. He cursed.
Shit, Renee sees us. She's waving from the porch.
Thank the heavens for her sweet, nosy sister. She grabbed her bag and he growled when she put her hand on the door. Oh, for God's sake, Max. I can open my own door.
Why do you have to try to push me away when you know you like it? You like it when I take care of you, and I like doing it. Sit there or I'll tell her about the cut, and she'll make you drink some nasty-smelling tea.
You're diabolical. He snorted and got out. She waited. Chapter 7. He hovered, making sure she kept drinking and staying hydrated. Happily, she seemed to accept his need to do it. She did eat the cheese and crackers, and he brought over some fruit, too. Renee noticed, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. He wasn't kidding. He would sick Renee on Kendra if this little witch even thought about not taking care of herself. Jack came in with a Keo and a wolf Max had never met before, though he scented Alpha right away.
Renee, I brought a guest. Hope that's all right.
Renee turned, tipping her face up to receive a kiss. Of course. We've got plenty. Galen's in charge. You know he always makes enough for 5 or 6 extra people. Jack sent an affectionate look to Galen before turning back to Renee.
Gorgeous. This is Gabe Murphy. He's one of the alphas of Pacific Pac. Before that, he was the national mediator and we worked together. In fact, the place Grace and Cade live is where he lived for years. He's in town for a few days, and as Grace wouldn't stop singing your praises, I figured I'd better bring him by so he could see my beautiful mates. He hasn't shut up about you and Galen since I arrived, so I figured I should come over and see you two in person.
Gabe bowed slightly.
It's my pleasure to meet Jack's mates. I'm in a triad as well, so it's always nice to see another working relationship like mine.
Renee blushed. You're mates with Grace's sister-in-law, Tracy, right? She was telling me about your little girls. Do you have pictures? Gabe's face lit at the mention, and Max's estimation of him rose.
That's us. He pulled his phone out, always happy to show pictures.
Kendra joined them, looking over Gabe's shoulder. Max knew wolves mated for life, had heard this one was mated not just to one wolf, but 2, and he had no romantic designs on Kendra at all. And yet her proximity to another male stirred his agitation, even as logic told him it was silly to feel that way.
This is Rose.
Gabe smiled down at the picture on his phone of a little girl with mischief in her smile. What you could see of it around all the chocolate.
She just turned 2. She looks so much like Nick, her other daddy. It's not funny. This is Leanne. She's going to be 5 soon and ready for kindergarten. The older 2 in this one are Chris and Haley, Nick's niece and nephew. They're ours too. We're very fortunate to have such a beautiful family.
I was raised by my aunt. She's more of a mother than the one I was born to could have been. Kendra's smile at Gabe was filled with emotion, and Renee hugged her. Max moved to her, Renee stepping aside so he could touch Kendra. Gabe looked up, met Max's gaze, and nodded, getting it.
We're happy to have you with us tonight, Gabe. Please make yourself at home. You have a lovely family, just as Grace said. Would you like a glass of wine, juice, soda?
Jack indicated a chair at the large table.
Have a seat, Gabe. I'll get you some juice. Renee squeezed it this morning.
Galen stepped forward as Max let go of Kendra, who relaxed against him one last second.
I'm Galen. Nice to meet you. This is Renee's sister, Kendra, and my brother, Max. 2 witches. Interesting. One of the humans who just mated with one of my wolves is a witch. He hasn't taken the change. Are you going to?
He asked Kendra after taking her hand in his. Max and I haven't really had that conversation. I hadn't considered it. I'm not opposed to the idea. How did it work out for him? Do you know? I mean, when he bonded with a wolf, did his magic grow or feel any different? Max smiled briefly. Galen caught him, and his smile echoed his brother's. Kendra hadn't argued being his. Ha.
I can give you his contact information if you like. He's open enough. I'm sure he'd talk to you about it.
Kendra smiled. Thank you, I'd like that. Gabe turned to Max and nodded.
You're Alpha.
Max nodded.
Next in line.
Kendra, can you help me with something? Renee called out. Max put a hand on Kendra's shoulder, a gentle caress as she leaned into it for a moment. He asked Renee,
What do you need, babe? I'll do it.
Renee rolled her eyes at him. She knew his game. Girl stuff. I believe tampons may be discussed. Kendra snorted a laugh and the two of them disappeared off into the bedroom.
I have no idea why you thought you could hide Kendra's pallor, or the fact that she's been bleeding from Renee. She doesn't need our sense of smell for that, or that you could sway her from getting an answer.
Jack plopped down at the table.
She all right? Magic lesson.
He wasn't going to go into detail with Murphy there. He trusted Jack like the family he was, but he didn't know Gabe Murphy from Adam, and there was no way he'd take a chance and expose Kendra to any danger if he could help it.
Magic makes her bleed?
Akio spoke then. Max liked the wolf who served as Jack's right hand in Boston. He'd taken up a lot of the slack, doing much of the travel across the country as a representative of the national pack since Jack had mated with Renee and wanted to stick close.
No, she cut herself after the lesson. I field dressed it, tried to get her to go to the doctor, but she refused. It's a shallow cut. You're so gone for her I should laugh. But I remember the early days when I first brought Renee around and you were the first to stand behind us. I'll tease you, but not enough to make you cry like a kitten.
Galen snickered.
Shut the fuck up, pretty boy.
Max shook his head and tried not to laugh.
I am gone, like beyond gone. She lets me be. It works out.
Galen and Jack burst out laughing.
Those two may not have grown up together, but damn, they're so much alike it's not funny.
You want to tell me why you're so pale? Renee demanded once they'd gone into the bedroom and closed the door. You know they all have super hearing, right? Renee waved a hand. Yes, worse than a bunch of old ladies with eavesdropping. But since Max obviously knows what's up, you can tell me. Also, Galen has good manners most of the time. They'll listen in but feel bad about it. I'm fine. I just had a particularly draining lesson. I cut myself. She motioned to her arm. Needed to ward Max's car. He took care of it there, so stop glowering at me. I had to do it the strongest way I knew how. I'm worried for everyone. And she was. It hit her as she'd walked out of Mary's. Hit her that while she and Renee had some means to ward off an attack, the others relied on tooth and claw. But the assholes out to steal magic didn't care about that. They cared about power. Kendra didn't want them to figure out how much energy shifters possessed. She patted her sister's arm. Get your frowny face off. You'll get forehead wrinkles. Anyway, the cheese and crackers really did help. Hey, and dinner is almost done, so I'll pig out and get to blame it all on magic depletion. Bonus. I'm going to bed early tonight and I promise to get lots of rest. To be totally honest with you, everything is, I don't know, different. My ability to spool up energy is better, smoother. It feels different, but I can't describe it just yet. Interesting. What does Mary have to say? Did you talk to her about it? Or to Rosemary? Mary said she felt something was different too. She's going to look into it and talk to me after. I don't like that you're doing all this alone. Renee's chin jutted out. It's not fair for you to take all this weight on for the rest of us. Look at you. You're pale and bleeding. I told you. I'm already feeling better. And eventually you can handle more as you learn. I need to rest more. I know I do. I don't have to be up early tomorrow and Max will make me breakfast in bed because I'm that lucky in life. Don't worry. By the way, Mary wanted me to tell you how excited she was about you starting with her tomorrow. Well, for heaven's sake, let's get you some more food. Galen's out there looking all delicious as he cooks enough for 3 dozen people. He'd look even hotter getting you a snack with some protein. Her sister looked her over again, catching Kendra as she tried to keep her composure intact. There's more to this story than you're telling me. Renee crossed her arms over her chest and glared. Today has been a lot. Just a lot, and I'm asking you to back off enough for me to process it all. Please. I'll talk to you more when I figure it out myself. I need the time to get it straight in my head. The anger was gone then, replaced by worry. Her sister simply enfolded her into a hug, and the first sob broke. Let it go. You're here with me, safe, surrounded by people who love you. I'm going to be swollen and red. But the tears didn't stop. Renee sighed, hugging Kendra, smoothing a hand up and down her back. How long has it been since you allowed yourself to cry? Long enough I remember how awful I feel while doing it, which is enough to keep me from letting myself cry, usually. She gulped in air, and something in her chest loosened as the tears fell. Max simply waltzed in with a brisk knock. She smelled him, that rich dark scent laced with sex, desire, strength, and masculinity. He stopped just an inch or two away from her, close enough that she felt his heat. He caressed her shoulder and spoke so very gently she was able to rein in the tears, even as the tenderness in the way he treated her broke through her.
Carina, why don't I take you home? We'll get you tucked up in bed. I'll feed you and you can go to sleep. Let me take care of you.
He totally does that all the time, she mumbled into Renee's sweater. He called you sweetheart to soften you up. Kendra knew Renee smiled as she said it. Galen and Jack do it too, the barging in thing. Welcome to being in love with an alpha male, huh? They mean well. But sometimes you need to smack them in the nose to get them to back off. Kendra wanted to die from embarrassment. The place was full of people, most of them with super hearing, so they knew she was crying. Can you please leave us alone for a few minutes? She asked Renee, who simply kissed her forehead and left the room. Max hugged her.
Baby, I hate to see you sad. Let me help you. Tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Unless I tell you to wait outside while I talk to my sister. He snorted a laugh.
Busted. I'd say I can't help it, but I just don't want to.
He swayed from side to side, holding her as she melted against him. The simple act of touch sent comfort and warmth through her system.
You hurt and my heart breaks. I want you to be happy all the time. I want you to smile and know you're loved.
Oh, he undid her. I can't leave. Renee invited me and I want to be here for her.
Let's get you a cool cloth for your eyes then.
He led her into the adjoining bathroom, and she sat on the side of the tub while he got her a washcloth. Thank you. She took the cloth, pressing it to her eyes. He hadn't tried to sway her to leave. Instead, he'd accepted that she wanted to stay for her sister. It wasn't the big house and the luxury car. It was his heart that attracted everything inside her.
I love you. I want to take care of you.
He did. She knew that, and despite the craziness of the situation, it was good. After what had turned out to be an enjoyable dinner, Max took her back to his place with every intention of cosseting her and making her rest. Once he got her inside his house, he breathed easier, felt safer with her there at his side, in the space he knew, without a doubt, he could defend. His cat eased back a bit. She even allowed him to carry her up to his bedroom, burrowing her face into his neck as he moved. When he pulled her down on his bed, she fit, like she was meant to be there, and she was. She yawned and allowed him to take her sweater and bra off. He quickly put one of his shirts on her, because the sight of her skin drove him wild. What do you look like as a cat? She asked, half naked, her hair tousled, her shirt inching up her creamy pale thigh.
You haven't seen me that way?
It hadn't occurred to him, but he supposed she hadn't. She shook her head.
Do you want to?
Her eyes lit, and he felt it to his toes. Now? Oh, yes. I mean, if it's not too tiring or what have you. I understand it takes a toll on the shifter when they change forms.
Lower-ranked shifters, yes. If I had to shift, say, 10 or 12 times in a few hours, I'd be very tired, and it would be difficult unless my father or another alpha forced the change. But like you with your magic, I don't use it all the time. It's fine."
And he wanted her to see his other self. His cat liked that very much. She sat on this bed, and he tucked the blankets he'd added for her. His body temperature ran very warm, so he hadn't much use for blankets, until his little witch found her way into his bed, around her legs.
"I'll change, and we'll have hot tea when I change back. And then we talk."
She frowned with a sigh, but nodded anyway. After he'd stripped off and he'd preened for her, he crouched and let his cat come. Next time he opened his eyes, the world was different. Sights and scents were a symphony. Hers brought a rumble of pleasure from his belly. She watched him, a smile on her face. He moved, slowly, butting her hand with his head and purring when she stroked him. She spoke, and the cat realized hers were words of wonder and awe. She spoke of his beauty and strength, as she touched his shoulders where his muscles bunched. Her hands on his fur, stroking over his body, pleased him. She was small, soft, and fragile. The cat wanted her safe, and the man agreed. She smelled like his. He licked up her hand. Over the delicate nip at her wrist, the magic she wore delighted him. The beast, the cat knew from her touch, knew its heart's mate, and all was well. When the man came forward again, he found himself in her arms.
"Well, hello."
She kissed him. "Thank you for that. Your cat is amazing. Beautiful, strong, powerful. Also, wow, you're like huge." After a snicker, she composed herself again. "Well, yes, that way. But you know what I mean."
Tell me what broke from you today in sobs so sad they nearly shattered my heart to know they lived inside you."
He settled in beside her, and she found his side again. "I just had a day with a crap ton of stuff going on. I realized a lot of stuff, and it stirred up things I like to think I've dealt with. I don't like not being in control of myself." He kissed the knuckles of the hand he held.
"You can let yourself be flawed. Just for a few minutes. Tell me."
She cleared her throat. "I know you think I was physically abused. What I was controlled and emotionally beaten down so that I ceased trusting myself, ceased understanding myself. So I drank. A lot. Enough to ignore the way my father-in-law would bump into me, or slam a door, and sometimes I'd be near enough to get hit. I took it to my husband, but he reassured me it wasn't on purpose, that his parents were very religious and didn't know how to handle my being a witch. So could I, dial it down a little?" He tried to maintain even breathing, even though rage began to build within. "I don't want to tell you all the gory details. It's over now and I'm done with it, with who I was then, but—" She paused, licking her lips. Her bottom lip trembled. "I didn't know up from down at the end."
"You don't have to say any more. I don't want to upset you any further."
She shook her head. "He kept me locked up. He said it was to cleanse me. He joined with them in their crazy movement. You know them, the same people who want to be allowed to kill all shifters." He did know them. The angry humans who protested outside hospitals that treated shifters, outside churches where they worshipped, or schools where they were educated. The same group of people who used to spend their weekends outside funerals of young men and women who died of HIV, holding up signs about how they were hated by their creator. At first I allowed it. It was easier to do than fight. And then I began to realize what a weak, unworthy person I was being by allowing it to happen. The last thing I wanted was for them to be right about me. So I began to plan to get free. Pride. The feeling was pride. And she couldn't have known how much he felt for her at that moment.
"And you did."
"I hurt them. I hadn't used my magic for some time, and that day I used a lot. It was unwieldy, but still mine. I took it. I realize now, I took it from everything around me because my reserves had been so low. I was a mess, angry, afraid. I lashed out at my father-in-law, who blocked my path, and my husband, who stood on the lawn screaming that he'd kill me if I tried to leave. A neighbor saw it and called the cops. When I drove away with my aunt that day, I vowed I'd never, ever allow anyone to make me ashamed of my gifts or to take my humanity. He understood. He'd accepted before, knew she had buttons, but now he got hers on a totally different level. What's more, he realized the way she allowed him to take over and protect had been an immense gift of her trust.
You're so beautiful, Kendra, powerful, a witch, a woman who deserves nothing but love and kindness. I want to give that to you.
She turned into his body, hugging him tight. You do. He wanted to mark her, wanted to sink his teeth into her skin the way Galen did with Renee, wanted her to accept all of him, including the imprint. What is it? She asked, her lips against his skin.
You know me like no one else does. It should be scary. It's not. I'm imprinted, you know that, right? Know what imprinting is to us?
Sort of. From what Renee has said about Galen, it's the way the cat within the human identifies with another person, as theirs, as their husband or wife. Like a maid, I guess. You don't do it like the wolves, though, right? He kissed her, tasting the salt of her grief, the spice of her happiness, the musk of her desire. Every part of her excited the man and the cat.
That's the gist of it, yes. We don't have that instant bond like the wolves do when they have unprotected sex. Ours is slower to build in many ways, though no less deep and certainly no less permanent. You're not scared?
He wanted to laugh. He'd been so worried about it, and she seemed to be taking it just fine. She took his face between her hands. You told me a few weeks ago that you were imprinting on me. It's not like I didn't know. As for fear, I'm scared all the time, but not of you. I worry I'll fuck things up. I worry I'm not worthy of you. My God, Max, you're going to run the jamboree, and I know enough of the politics there to understand my being human will be a detriment to you. I don't want to make things harder for you. Without missing a beat, he slid her panties off and she laughed. The laughter faded as he rolled over, her thighs automatically opening to him, long, lithe legs wrapping around his body. Satisfaction slammed into him.
Wet already.
Always. Any time I even think about you. When he began to inch his way into her pussy, her eyes darkened, lips parted, gaze only for him.
You don't get it, do you? I don't care what Beth thinks, or Carlos, or the other small group who have issues with humans. You're mine. That's what counts. My cat is set to run the jamboree, and my cat wants you as much as the man does. If they can't trust my judgment on something as important as my wife, I hardly think tossing you aside for a shifter would make a difference for the better. It would weaken me as a person and as a leader. I would die for any of my cats, but I won't give up my heart. You're my heart, and you're eminently worthy of running the jamboree at my side.
He didn't miss the way her eyes glimmered with emotion and unspent tears. Her smile was for him alone. I never imagined loving like this. It's improbable and ridiculous. She laughed. You know what I mean, so get that look off your face. I mean, I've known you for 5 months now. We've only been dating a very short while. He frowned, annoyed to be going over the same ground.
I know what I feel.
And right now, he had to fuck her or he'd lose his mind. He pulled out and pressed back in, loving the way her breath stuttered, and she caught her bottom lip between her teeth. Oh, that's very nice. One of your finest qualities. He laughed, gathering her wrists in his hand, stretching her arms above her head, and holding her in place, her back arched, thrusting her breasts up. But it was that delicious little gasp she gave him that made him weak-kneed.
Yes, that's the way. I may just have to hold you like this for a few hours, torturing you with climax after climax until I'm sated of you.
Given how his every waking thought was of her, he wasn't sure that was possible. Not that he'd turn down the chance to make her come for hours. You look far more handsome this way than frowning. Her voice was breathless, as a pretty flush built on her neck, taunting him to sink his teeth into her flesh. As far as you knowing how you feel, of course you do. I mean, look, you turn furry and run around in the wilderness. I can bend energy and use it in all sorts of ways. It's not like I don't already live an improbable and ridiculous life. Why not this too?
Why not indeed?
Joy filled him in a way he'd never experienced before at her acceptance of the situation.
On to fucking. Then we can talk more.
Bossy.
As Renee would say, duh.
After a quick nip of that fleshy bottom lip of hers, he got back to work. Deep inside, her body was hot, wet, ready for him. He kissed and licked over her neck, across the blade of her collarbone, into the hollow of her throat. She writhed against him, pulling against his hold on her wrists, but only in a playful way. If she wanted to be free, she'd say so. He knew that much. More. God, please, deeper. I like it harder. He obliged, thrusting harder and deeper, always remembering the relative difference in their strength. If he ever hurt her, he'd hate himself. A sound broke from her lips, desperate, needy, so laced with sexuality it sent a shiver through him. Kendra was sexually bold in a way he'd never expected just from a glance. She knew what she liked and wasn't afraid to ask for it. Ask? Demand. It meant more to him than he could express that she trusted him with herself, with her body, and her heart. She moved her head, exposing the long, pale line of her throat and the place his mouth watered to mark. He licked it instead and felt the ripple of her inner muscles all around him. What had she done to deserve such a man? Kendra shivered as she pulled against the hand restraining her wrists. Her entire body hummed as he thrust into her pussy and dragged out slowly. His weight on her was just right, enough to cage her, hold her in place, but not too much that he harmed her. He was so ridiculously sexy when he got all controlling in bed. More so because she knew he held back to keep from hurting her. That edge of control, the vibration from him, the way his muscles flexed and played as he fucked. Nothing in her life had ever been like this. Little bone-deep orgasms skittered through her, keeping her on edge for a big one, and all she could do was hang on, knowing he'd take care of her, knowing her pleasure was on his mind, knowing he found pleasure in how she responded to him. I love how you look at me, she managed to say. Needing him to understand, he meant something to her in ways she couldn't always articulate.
You're the most fucking beautiful thing I've ever witnessed.
She groaned, and then he pulled out. That got her attention, dragging her back up from that pleasure-seeped place he always took her to. Hey! He chuckled as he kissed his way down her body, and she wasn't complaining at all when he pushed her thighs wide and dove in, licking her pussy, teasing, flicking, and generally devastating her with his mouth. Orgasm hit, far harder and much quicker than she'd thought, flooded her until she had to close her eyes and let it take over. Her muscles still jumped as he pushed his way back inside, setting off more waves of pleasure.
I needed your taste in my mouth, on my lips and tongue.
He growled in her ear, holding her hands above her head again. She was past words, so she managed an and left it at that. He said the best stuff, from wicked, dirty, bad, wrong to sweet and romantic. Man, oh man, he must have a swath of women in his wake a mile wide. And you're all mine, she mumbled.
Don't know what brought that on, but yes, querida, I am.
He hissed.
You're so slick and hot. I can't hold off. I need to come inside you.
Yes. Chapter 8. Rosemary met Kendra and Renee at Mary's door the following day. Their aunt smiled widely when she saw them, pulling them into a hug. You're here. Oh, good. We have some positive news. I think we found it. She opened the door wider, ushering them all inside. Max, Galen, and Jack stood just behind them, having insisted on accompanying Renee and Kendra. Rather than waste time arguing over the inevitable, the women had simply thrown their hands up and allowed it. They wouldn't let us come alone, Renee explained. Kendra knew her sister was really nervous and excited about the lessons. She was proud of how far Renee had come in such a short time. Of course. They want to protect you. Come in. Mary is in the kitchen getting some tea. Rosemary tipped her face up, and the men dropped kisses on her cheek as they walked in. Kendra had wanted to speak with her aunt about Max, but she hadn't been able to other than to say she'd been seeing him. Either Rosemary had been too busy to sit down and listen to the story when she'd called, or Kendra had been too busy or never alone long enough to tell it. Clearly, though, her aunt saw the way he watched her, saw the connection between them without too much effort. You and I need to have some dinner this evening. Rosemary sent Kendra a raised brow, and Kendra laughed, linking an arm through her aunt's. I know. We have a lot to catch up on. Now, what do you think you found? They walked deeper into the house, and Mary came out with a tea tray. Hello, everyone. The bracelets on her wrists jingled together as she turned to smile at Galen, Jack, and Max. My goodness, you three are fine examples of masculinity. I figured you'd be here today. My husband is just down that hall, first door on the left. I believe there's some sort of sporting event on the television, and beer served with junk food of every type. Max looked to Kendra, concern in his eyes. Mary must have noted it. Nothing can get in here, you have my word. But he waited for Kendra to speak. She hid her smile, but moved to him, needing that contact as his hands went to her shoulders, caressing down her arms and clasping her hands. I'm fine. You're very close by, and it is safe here, and let's be honest. There are 4 pretty powerful witches here. I think we could manage to hold them off, at least until you all arrived. His lips quivered as he held back an amused smile, and her mouth watered to taste them. I can feel you partially through the bond we're growing, he said quietly. We'll talk more about that later. He winked at her, knowing he'd lobbed a bomb her way, inclined his head, Jack and Galen following suit, and disappeared toward games, beer, and chips. My, the 2 of you certainly have your hands full in the man department, Rosemary smiled, putting an arm around each of her nieces. Max isn't like him. Her aunt never said Kendra's ex-husband's name, believing it gave him more power and recognition than he deserved. I know. They followed Mary down the hall as she led them toward her practice space. I have a friend. She's hard to locate unless she wants to be located. She's an encyclopedia of sorts. She brought me a location spell. Spells of this sort were hoarded, traded, searched for, and honed over time. Sharing a spell was an intimate thing. We don't think Renee can do it, at least not alone. It's going to take a level of focus and skill that she's not quite at yet. Rosemary looked at Renee. Sorry, sweetie, but you're going to be a help here. And eventually, you'll have the chops to do this sort of ritual work. Renee shrugged. Not insulted at all. I'm just excited to learn. Kendra removed her shoes and socks, preferring the closest contact to the earth she could get when she worked her magic. Why can't you do it? She paused and realized the answer. You need the biological link. That's it, isn't it? Mary nodded. Yes, smart cookie you are. Your mother was like that. Intuitive. Yes, well, their mother was dead, so how much good did it do her? All right, so let's make a circle. You and Renee in the innermost circle. Rosemary and I will be just outside that one in another circle. You need to keep your focus at all times. This is old magic, Kendra. Blood magic. Family magic. The ties that connect you will bring us answers. But projecting the ties leaves you open to danger, which is why we're doing it here and also in 2 circles. Are you all right with this? Kendra asked Renee, whose eyes had gone wide. Heck yeah. I mean, it's spooky and all, but I trust you and you trust them, so it's all good. Just tell me what to do and I'll do it. Kendra would work the ritual, so she drew the circles, calling them to her, invoking protection and clarity of thought and purpose. Mary gave her the instructions, and she barely felt the slice into the same place she'd used to ward Max's car. Her blood, mixed with Renee's, would carry the spell, create the connection to find their father. She threw open her other sight, the day-to-day world falling away, replaced by the wisps of color people carried around, their energy, their emotions, their personal brand of magic. There were darker things just beyond, darker things looking for her, She knew it without a doubt, knew they looked for Renee and would harm her if they could. Still, she kept her focus as she spoke the words, moving her feet the way the woman had said to. The dance was old, the steps not choreographed until they were being performed. They came to her, one after the next. Exhaustion seeped into her bones. She drew, carefully, of the air around her, of the plants, the garden just beyond the windows, and found Max, a bright, shimmering energy there just for her. His scent surrounded her, filled her, as she steadied and continued to move her way through the spell. It caught her up in its own rhythm and sway, like a song she heard in her head. She let it in, spun it back out. This was what it felt to be one with the energy. It felt right as it consumed her, used her to make her intentions reality. Until the last words were whispered, the last steps taken, and she let go, falling to her knees. Max barreled into the room, barely leashing his fury as he saw her, pale and sweating, on her knees. The scent of her magic painted the air, heady, sticky sweet. His cat relaxed a tiny bit, but the man felt the bite of the claws reminding him to stay vigilant. The cat didn't give a fuck about anyone but her.
You mind telling me what the hell just happened?
Rosemary looked him over quickly. Your agitation won't help right now. She's been working a spell. It took a lot out of her, but she drew on you, took that spell farther than I could have, and I've got 30 years on her. She's changing, growing in ways I hadn't imagined. I'm so proud of you, Kendra. Rosemary pushed the hair from Kendra's face, and man and cat had had enough.
All this time? One spell?
Christ, they'd been there 2.5 hours. Renee nodded. She was amazing, she said to Galen as he edged into the room, Jack on his heels. I just was the backup. She did this thing, this sort of dance, and she spoke in a beautiful language. You were a lot more than backup, Renee. You and she worked together totally seamlessly. She needed you and you helped so much. Rosemary smiled up at Renee. Max scented her blood. His cat snarled inside, urging him to action.
She's bleeding.
He stood at the edge of the circle, knowing enough not to break it.
Can I touch her?
Mary stood, brushing her hand over the edges of the 2 circles. Broken. She looked to Max. Touch her? He did more than that. He picked her up, cradled her against his body, tamping down his desire to run out of there with her. She turned into him, snuggled against his chest, and he gave her touch. Gave her affection and strength, and she received. Here, let me get at her cut. Renee knelt, Jack touching her shoulder, Galen watching over the room, his thigh against Jack. Kendra took a deep breath and sighed, some of her bonelessness gone. Renee looked up at Max from where she cleaned the slice he'd cleaned only the day before. Touch. It helps her too. Don't need to be a shifter to let yourself be comforted by the ones you love. Take her home. I tucked some tea that should help into her bag. Make sure she rests until tomorrow. Kendra's aunt touched his arm before she squeezed Kendra's hand again. I know you don't know me very well, but I love these girls like they were my own. This won't cause her any lasting damage, Max. I wouldn't do that to her. It's part and parcel of using great reserves of energy. She'll be more efficient at it over time. He wasn't sure he could take this sort of thing on a regular basis, but she was worth the effort, and he knew he had no right to ask her to stop. Even if he'd felt like he was having a stroke when he came into that room and saw her just moments before. Rosemary smiled up at him. I'll see you both tomorrow at your parents' house. Your mother called to invite me. I'm very much looking forward to it. Tell Kendra I'll be checking in on her later.
She'll be at my house. Renee, babe, can you get your aunt that number?
Renee nodded, leaning forward to kiss her sister's forehead. She did great, Max. Totally kicked ass. She'll be fine, I promise. He said his quick goodbyes and took her away from there, loading her into his car and taking her home. His home, and he wanted it to be hers. Somehow the sight of her there, so fragile and wan, without her shoes, huddled in a coat, tore him to pieces, even though he knew she'd recover. I'm all right, she managed to say, as he pulled into his driveway. "Just need a nap."
"You'll be getting one."
He didn't bother asking to help her from the car, and she didn't bother arguing, a fact that alarmed him. He picked her up again, heading upstairs, straight to his bed. She didn't complain when he quickly undressed her and slid her under the blankets.
"I'll be right back. I'm going to make you some of that tea. You'll drink it, and then you'll sleep."
She nodded, her eyes drooping as she rested against the pillow. The spill of her hair against the pale green of the pillowcase appealed to him, even though he knew how wrung out she was. A task, that's what he needed to keep his mind off the bad outcomes he couldn't seem to stop envisioning. He brought the tea and made her drink it all, even though she flipped him off twice, and gagged a bit at the end.
"Nice to see your attitude is back. It's how I know you're going to be okay."
He kissed the top of her head and tucked her in.
"Now, you go to sleep. I'll be within earshot and check in. Just say my name, baby, and I'll be right here."
Her smile lightened his heart. When he got back downstairs, he made himself a cup of tea, Earl Grey, not that crap she had to drink. And then he allowed it to come. The fear of losing her made him shake. That's when Gibson came in.
"Galen called. She okay?"
All lanky 6+ feet of his tattooed and dreadlocked brother fell into the chair across from his. He didn't want to do this, but Gibson, unlike Galen, was blunt and pushy. He knew Max better than pretty much anyone, and there was no way he could hide his anxiety.
"She's sleeping. I made her choke down some tea that smelled like the bottom of a birdcage. Her color is already beginning to improve as well. So why are your hands shaking? I had no idea that it would be like this. I figured she'd do her witchy thing here and there, like she does with Renee, moving shit with their magic, not fucking passing out and bleeding. Not thugs hunting her down so they can kill her and steal her magic." "So you're going to break up with her then? Move on to a nice shifter female who, by the way, turns furry and has sharp claws and teeth? I can see how the worry might distract you from work and running the jamboree after Poppy steps aside."
Max sniffed and growled.
Yeah, aren't you all emo and shit to use reverse psychology on me? You know I love her. You know I've imprinted on her, and you know I have no plans to break up with her. Yeah, I know it. And I know your hands are shaking just thinking about what could have happened, but... And I hate to get all emotional and shit, so if you bring this up, I'll deny it. It's supposed to feel that way. You're supposed to feel as if you'd die if she did. Why on earth would you want to be with someone who didn't feel like they were an integral part of you? What's the fucking point of love, Max, if you don't feel it in all its glorious intensity, both the good and the bad? It sucks when you make sense."
Gibson laughed, but kept it quiet so as not to disturb Kendra.
"I like her. She's got a warrior soul. She's good for you. A woman you can count on, and let's be honest, this just makes her even stronger to be at your side. She's totally worthy of running the jamboree with you. She can protect herself and those cats. My cat is comforted by this. You have to understand the rest of us will feel similarly. You and Galen both lucked out. Too bad they don't have any cousins or anything. I put some extra people on her, on the school and her apartment. Since her place was Jack's before, it's very secure, though she'd be better off here. I expect you'll propose that one to her soon enough. Can I do anything else?" "Yes. I want you to look into her ex-husband and his family. I want to know where they are and what they're up to. Full search. I'll handle helping her transfer the protection order locally, so don't worry about that part."
Gibson's demeanor changed, hardened.
"Oh, so it's that way? Yeah, I'm on it. If we need to make our point in person, I'm good for that too. We may have to. But let's just be sure they're far the fuck away from here first. Then we can go from there."
Gibson stood.
"Unless you're up for a beer and some television, I'm going to get started on that work for you. We have some of it from when she came to town originally, so it shouldn't be too hard."
He stood, clasping his brother's forearm, sliding his cheek along Gibson's.
"Thank you for everything. I appreciate it."
His brother nodded once.
"I'm family. Comes with a subscription package."
He walked to the door before turning back.
I got your back.
For a long beat after Gibson had left, Max stood in his entryway, listening, letting himself center and focus. He would know if someone came in, would feel if a threat breached the outside security. Satisfied that it was safe, he moved to where she was, needing to see her, taking the stairs quickly until he came to stand in the doorway to his bedroom, looking at her in his bed, watching the rise and fall of her chest, feeling it echo within his own. She'd become more than a woman he was in love with. She'd become necessary to him, integral. He'd have to find a way to get through the fear and support her. She had a gift, even if it put her in danger. And she'd experienced others trying to take it from her, trying to shove it away and make her into someone and something she wasn't. He would never do that to her. He'd need to figure out how to do that and still protect her. Chapter 9. When she opened her eyes, he was there. She knew he'd been there watching over her the whole time she'd been out. It was one of the reasons she found herself able to let go and totally fall under, letting her body recharge. He was there to protect and defend, and while it might not be politic to admit it out loud, she found it a very fine quality. Loved how he took care of her, loved that he gave her the space to be who she was, but made room for himself in her life as well. Took up a lot of space, more each day, and she loved that part too. He wasn't sleeping anymore. She knew he was awake, though his eyes were closed. She touched him anyway, loving the hardness of his muscles against her hands. When his lids lifted, his eyes locked on hers, and she didn't fight the rush of pleasure at the recognition there.
How are you feeling?
His voice vibrated through her. She stretched, luxuriating in the pleasure of it. Pretty good, actually. I was drained, but now I'm not. And I opened my eyes to behold a tall, sexy man in bed with me, all naked and everything. Handy. He'd been on his back and turned to face her. She moved to him without a thought, seeking his heat and his touch.
Well then, I'm feeling even better.
He held her to him, the thud of his heartbeat where her head lay on his chest, reassuring. You're so warm. I may never want to get out of this bed. She wriggled, smiling at the hardening cock at her belly. Seems like you're good with that plan, he growled, his cute and not very scary gruff growl.
You're going to rest. Then I will make you dinner. Then you will go back to sleep.
Grr, grr. I'm the big tough alpha cat, grr. I won't have sex with you. She said it while laughing, and he joined her after a groan.
Smartass. Talk to me, Kendra. Tell me. Share what scares you, what makes you happy. What brings the shadows in your eyes sometimes.
She tipped her head back enough to see him better. It was go time. She could open up to him, accept this wonderful thing between them, all of it. Or she could back off and make him wait and hurt him for no real reason. She had been a coward before, and it wasn't her. It didn't fit right. And he deserved all of her. You don't just love me, you possess me. No, that's not the right word either. Or maybe it is. Gah, I'm messing this up. She tried to wriggle free, but he tightened his arms.
If you really want to get up, I'll let go. But if you're just embarrassed, it's only me. I like you here with me, against me.
She couldn't help but smile at him. How could anyone resist this man? I've never been with anyone, not ever, who made me feel so wanted. You look at me and there's no room for anyone else. You touch me in a way I know you never have with anyone before. It's so very big and bold and all-encompassing. She paused, forcing herself not to hide her face. I like it. I'm scared of how much I like it. I'm scared I'll get used to it and then I won't have it. I can get over a lot. I've gotten over a lot. But I don't know if I could get over you.
You undo me. So strong, bold. Gibson came by earlier and he said you're a warrior. He's right, you are. But beneath that, there's softness, vulnerability, compassion. This is it for me. Do you know what it's like, how hard it is for me not to mark you when I'm buried balls deep in your pussy, when everything I am is wrapped around you, bound to you?
She thought of Renee and the mark she had on her neck. She shivered and had to close her eyes a moment. Like what my sister has? He bent and nuzzled her neck.
For a shifter, it's more than a love bite. A mark like that is a ritual. It ties us together with our partners. It's also a public declaration, like a wedding ring or what have you. I want to mark you. I want you to be mine all the way. I'm afraid of freaking you out. It's not the same as with wolves. No, we don't mate that way. But with us, imprinting is similar. Marking you would seal that for me, in the eyes of my family and other shifters. I'm not going anywhere. Even if you're uncomfortable with me marking you, I'm still here. I will always be here.
Can I tell you something I've never said out loud before? He shifted so he could take her hands.
You can say anything to me.
What scares me is not ever feeling like I belong to someone, like I'll die without experiencing that connection. I know people are married and have kids and love their partners, but I want more than that. I want to be indelible to someone. Her voice was so small it cut him up inside. He got it then, understood her. The woman was a warrior, but inside her lived a girl whose mother had left, whose father never cared to see if she was alive. A girl who was raised with love, but clearly with a feeling of loss that never got filled. I know, right? I'm such a cliché. The girl with the dead mother. I'm textbook. And look at Renee. She's done so much for herself, and she didn't have half of what I did. I had Rosemary. I had my grandmother and my uncle. I grew up with cousins. I was raised to love my gifts. I had everything, and it's not enough. I'm selfish. I'm not fixed. It's something I struggle with sometimes. You don't need that. He wanted to laugh, but he sure as hell didn't want her to think he agreed with the stuff she just said.
You belong to me. You're indelible to me, written into my heart, my flesh.
He said it quietly, but with conviction.
From the first moment I saw you, in the midst of all the chaos, the worry over Renee, you were there and no one else existed. I stalked you like prey.
He snorted.
That sounds creepy, and I suppose it could be in another context, but I knew I wanted you, so I listened to myself and watched you. When I was sure, I freed myself from all relationships and set out to woo you. I want every bit of you. I'm a greedy bastard, and I don't share. You're not broken, Kendra, and frankly, the last word I'd associate with you is selfish. The things you've experienced have shaped you. That's how everyone is.
The glimmer of a smile on her lips buoyed his confidence, made him believe they were moving in the right direction.
Let me be your family. Let me possess you, but let you be free to be who you are. I respect that you have a job to do, even if it does scare the crap out of me. I will be at your side when you find and confront your father. Let me love you. Be mine. Will you? And I'll be yours. This can be our house, our bed. The seeds of our family right here. I won't pressure you any more about it, but I want you to know it's what I'd like to have with you, what I want to build for the future.
The ache she felt wasn't from sadness, not anymore. It was the good sort of ache. This was it, the right choice, the right man, the right everything. And who was she to turn her back on perfect? Where did you come from, Max? How can you be so perfect and wonderful? He did laugh then, kissing her forehead.
I'm not. Weren't you telling me how bossy and pushy I am just this morning? But I'm perfect for you, and that's what matters.
She licked her lips. So, this biting thing, does it hurt? He hardened from head to toe.
I've never been bitten, not sexually. My parents nipped us when we got out of line, when we were in our other forms, that is. Are you afraid of pain?
He heard her swallow, saw her pupils grow larger as she shook her head. I like it, sometimes. Not real pain. I don't want to be slapped in the face or hit or anything. But sometimes when I'm getting inked, it sends me to another level of consciousness. I like to ride that edge where it hurts just enough to feel good. I think I'd like that. For you to mark me." He let out a breath, long and slow, hoping to steady himself, but it didn't really work.
"It can wait until you're better, and you need to know this connection we have between us. The way I felt that spike and then sudden bottoming out of your energy today, well, that's the bond, and it'll deepen, strengthen after I mark you. My cat will be married to you. In the eyes of my culture, my people will be married."
She sprang up, pushing him onto his back, and scrambled atop him. "Well, wow. All right, go big or go home, Max de la Vega. I'm just fine. I told you. I needed the rest, and now I'm ready to go." He'd planned to at least symbolically urge her to wait, but instead she reached down, spread herself open, stroked her middle finger over her clit and that barbell she wore, making a soft moan that set him on fire.
"You're a menace,"
he growled, as she reached back with her free hand and angled his cock perfectly. He lost his mind when she slid down on him. "So you've said. Shall I stop?" he growled, rolling her over so that he was on top and in control of the depth and ferocity of his thrusts.
"That's better."
"Whatever you say." Her lips quivered as she struggled not to smile. He bent and nipped her bottom lip, bringing a ragged moan from her and his own in response.
"I say get your hand back down and make yourself come."
She moved quickly as he held himself away from her to give her the room. Her inner walls tightened, the muscles fluttering, as she began to play with her clit.
"I love it that you know what you want, and that you take it."
He said it before he licked over the spot he'd been toying with marking, and she writhed, arching into him. Of course, that movement around his cock and the slide of her nipples against his chest only brought him closer to blowing. If I don't know what makes me hot, how can I be sure to get it from anyone else?
"Beauty, you undo me."
I'm not sure anything can undo you. That's so nice. You feel so good inside me. You're always in control. I can count on you. I like that. She added a circle of her hips when he pushed all the way back into her pussy, ripping the last of his control to shreds. But it wasn't until she gasped, sucking in air with a ragged cry, her pussy tightening around him as she came, that he let himself lean down to her neck. He breathed her in as she came, breathed in her magic, her scent, the scent of her arousal, the basic clean spice of her skin, the scent his body made against hers. He scored the edge of his teeth down the tendon at the side of her neck, and she whimpered. Not a bad whimper at all, but the sort of whimper a woman made when she wanted a man to go on about his business. A needy whimper. He answered that need with one of his own, a need so large it filled him from head to toe, and bit where her neck met her shoulder. Her back arched as she cried out, a shout of delight, edged with a bit of pain, but not alarm. His cat shifted inside, reveling in her taste, in the way she submitted to him, the way her fingers dug into the muscles of his shoulders, urging him on, urging him closer, all while he continued to fuck into her body, so hot and slick. Their connection, the beginnings of the bond created through his imprinting, and now the physical mark he gave her, blew open. He knew she felt it too as she froze a moment and made a soft sound, a sigh of satiation. That's when he came, buried in her physically, swimming through their emotional bond, and knowing what he had was monumental, knowing he'd keep it,